Right, we will get started. Thank you for being patient as we worked out some technical issues. We will start with item 2.1, discussion relating to the draft general plan. Michael.
Okay. Thank you all for being here, and sorry that Clint did not join us tonight. I understand he has family that is ill, so as outlined in the memo, we basically have three things that we're hoping to accomplish or at least initiate tonight. One is taking a pulse on the council on the draft plan itself. We delivered to you the most recent draft that includes the planning commission's recommendations. It was a request from the council. And we'll just probably look at each chapter in brief and just ask for an overall opinion, like chapter 1. Is this a chapter that the council wishes to discuss? Chapter 2, chapter 3, kind of look at it like that. The other is looking a little at the master plan map, or what's called the future land use map. Since the planning commission's recommendation, staff has identified a few potential changes that we'd like to make the council aware of. I think you've talked about a couple of these once before, the last time Susie was here. So we'd like to look at that and see again if the council feels comfortable with the map or what changes you would like to see made before we go to the next step in the process, which will be a public hearing before the council. And then that third piece is, what is our timeline? What does the council want us to do? Do we want to identify when that public hearing date is going to occur? Or do we need to have some other meetings before we set that public hearing date? So we're just hoping to get that direction from the council tonight. If we can't resolve or at least receive the direction from the council on the individual chapters, hopefully you can at least tell us what concerns you have or what things you would like us to research further and be prepared to talk with you about in a future work meeting. So with that said, Susie, are you ready to kind of lead us through kind of a high level overview of our general plan text and kind of taking a poll?
Yeah.
Hi, Susie.
Hi.
Sorry, I hit traffic.
Yeah, it was,
Welcome
to Harriman.
I know, it was like everything between here and Harriman too. It's like, hey, here's under construction, this is under construction. So with the format of the plan, chapter 1 is the sort of introduction, and you know what Michael and I thought we might do is just like, as we're going through this, just, you know, is there anything in the introduction that people want to come back to and discuss? And we'll just kind of make a note of that, and then that way we can just structure our time most efficiently with you here tonight. If there's 4 people that want to talk about the introduction, then we'll definitely come back to that. If there's only 1 person, then that might be, you know, a conversation that we can have separately, or you know, specific comments. So just thinking about, you know, what you've seen so far with the introduction to the general plan. Is there anybody that has significant comments or change requests with that chapter?
No, not enough. Not so much.
Yeah,
It's just
that's-
one.
And that's, you know, and this isn't, you know, like your last, so if you think of something, like as we go through, you know, just let us know. So chapter 2 is the community context, so that sort of sets the stage for where Harriman is now, where it's projected to go in the future. It's a little bit of the stats, a little bit of the background, and sort of framing the general plan as a document itself. In that chapter, is there anybody that had specific items that they wanted to
Just
come
a
back
couple
and discuss?
things, and these are just because of recent actions.
Right.
The 2.2, the vested development rights and the future population has obviously gone up.
Yeah.
And then the narrative around Olympia Hills is
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah, slightly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so-
I know. Yeah.
Sorry, a lot happened, right?
I know, a lot has
We
happened.
intentionally made a problem for you.
Yeah.
We met earlier this week and we talked about folding in the 22 census information
Yeah.
as well as the
Okay.
Olympia.
In the print copy, I think there should be some of that brief updates of what we know about census 2020 and the total population. And based on what Michael's told me, we still think Harriman's probably even a little bit higher than what that official
Census.
estimate was.
So do we.
April 1st.
Yeah.
So I think I kind of left it. Census 2020 said this, we think the estimated population is still up at about 60,000. So it's just to kind of document what Harriman is and that you're still in this big group.
Susie's also been very involved with working with Bowen Collins on our recent population estimate and growth projections. And so she's very aware of what study has been completed in the last, I think, month. And we'll reflect that in here.
So what are their projections for build out population?
It's now 125? Yeah, it's,
We bounced between 120 and 150.
Yeah,
That's
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 kinda
my
what I
number,
figured.
yeah. In all honesty, I wouldn't be surprised if it eventually makes higher than that.
It
Yeah.
could.
yeah,
Okay, so just
But then
kind of,
ADUs, right? And
Yeah.
then you just.
right, well, in household size, I think everywhere is kind of going up because people are, some people are doubling up for multi-generational families. And so, the smaller household sizes that you tend to see in urban areas, there's been a little bit of a switch in that with a lot of cities, just because I think it's a reflection of, kids moving back home that might otherwise have gone out and formed their own households. So, we're seeing some different patterns there. Okay, and so then chapter 3 is the overview of the community vision. So that sort of sets the stage for most of the policies and recommendations of the general plan. The reason that the future land use map is what it is. It's the key initiatives that we've talked about multiple times. So I think everybody's pretty familiar with those. And it's really, that's kind of your overarching framework. If a general, person from the community wanted to pick up the general plan and get a sense of where Harriman City's focus is for the future, that chapter is gonna give them a pretty good overview of what the city's priorities is and the community's priorities are. So within that chapter 3, is there anything that we wanna come back to and discuss in a little bit more detail?
I had a question, and it relates to this, this paragraph about the heart of Harriman, the town center.
Page you're on, right?
It's on, Vision 8. It's, chapter 3, growing wisely, so that middle paragraph is what I'm talking about. So it's talking about, growing wisely will ensure the heart of Harriman, the town center, will continue to evolve and become the community's housing, employment, social, and civic center by directing the majority of growth into areas of existing and planned infrastructure and services. The city can preserve open spaces, natural and scenic value, blah, blah, blah. This part about the town center being, the community's housing, employment, social, civic center. Explain that to me. How, I understand initially when the town center was proposed, that was kind of the theory behind it, right? That's what it was originally. It's evolved from that, what it was projected, 10, 12 years ago. How does that really fit in with what the city's real heart is?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I think especially, with the decision about Olympia and the projected growth that's gonna happen out there.
And the town center that's projected out there, wasn't that what it was
Yeah, there's,
called?
Yeah.
town centers,
Yeah, they've
yeah.
got the town centers out there,
Village
so
centers,
it's like, which town center are we talking about?
Yeah, well, in Olympia, when they're like, we're gonna have, 20 town center, it wasn't 20, but, they were envisioning a lot of these sort of neighborhood village centers and, I think just understanding, the vision for those and then the reality of how long it takes those type of centers and nodes to emerge.
would suggest it does still, clearly this is the civic
It's
center.
the civic center, but it might not be all of those things that
Yeah.
it was intended to be, when the
Yeah,
town center was
and I guess that's the
first
thing is, I don't have any problem with this, that would be a great thing if we could do that, right?
Yeah, it's still a great aspiration, but
But, trying to make it the center of employment and it just doesn't seem like that's really what's gonna happen around here.
Yeah.
Even if we had all these commercial pads filled, it's gonna be a small neighborhood commercial feel,
Yeah.
right? And it's gonna be really great around here, it's gonna be a great amenity for civic events to have, this kind of thing here. I just don't know that becomes the heart of the city's,
Yeah.
As Harvey
economic,
says, that's exactly how it was thought when it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
made, but it really shouldn't even be called the town center, maybe it really is the civic center
Right.
rather than the town center.
And it could be, the town center is that social and civic center, it's definitely, one of the housing centers, but it's not gonna be the only one. And I think when you start to look at Olympia and you start to see how some of the areas down by the RSL, Academy have
yeah, cause
started
Academy
football,
Village is almost like
Right, yeah,
a
you're
town
starting
center
to
down there,
see-
right?
yeah. You're starting to see multiple nodes and concentrations of housing development, so I think we can probably, reflect that in that paragraph and say, the town center is one, but there's probably going to be multiple, and some of those will be, there is gonna be an employment center, but the way things have transpired is that probably isn't gonna be the town center,
Right.
especially with all the employment.
Yeah, and Susan, this
Is
is
it currently
really
there?
nitpicking,
Yeah.
right? We're
No,
getting
no, yeah, and that was
into
kind
this
of like,
stuff. I mean, this is, overall, this is really great stuff.
I think it's a good point, though. Oh, sorry, Mayor, go
Yeah,
ahead.
well, I'm just saying, I agree, but having had those residents come back and pull it out and quote our general plan to us in meetings.
Yeah.
Right,
Hey,
You
this
wanna-
is what you're supposed to be doing, this is what you said you're supposed to be
Yeah.
doing, I think we should nitpick this a little bit.
Historically, it's not that uncommon where you would have a town center, a downtown that has some of the cultural elements of that community, and yet the density evolves somewhere else. You'll have sometimes a lower density, maybe historic core. And although this is all new, that really is probably this town center. But quite likely, those jobs and some of the more dense communities might be somewhere else. So I think you're right, I think we should update this language to reflect
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I don't know how you incorporate in this, that's, I'll let you guys take a stab at that, but, conversations about there isn't really one center, right?
Yeah, and there's
It's a
different types
more
of centers.
dispersed thing, right? That we're gonna have different elements down on the south end that we're gonna have up in Anthem, that we're gonna have out in Olympia, that, and so all of those are important community elements, right? And I just ask you to maybe revisit that, look at the language around it.
yeah,
As far as placemaking though, I think we have a lot going on by referring to this as the town center. Question is, how do we distinguish this the city's town center versus neighborhood level centers?
right, neighborhood level or
Yeah.
employment housing centers, that are starting to emerge elsewhere, so I think that there's gonna be multiple centers and there's gonna be multiple types of
Yeah.
centers, and I think that's something that we can try to incorporate.
I think one of the issues there is simply that we have made a monument sign that says town center.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
Like
this is,
you still have a town center.
this is the town center, right? We refer to it as the town center, and so maybe it's just what we've called it, and finding a different term that might be more appropriate might help that language. Because when we say town center, everyone's going to assume we're
We're
referring
still
to
talking about.
Harriman Town Center.
I think culturally and civically, it's stronger here.
Did you just call it the main town center,
Yeah.
main civic center? or something
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah.
I mean,
Primary,
this is
something
being
like
a
that.
modern, a new city, right? You don't have a traditional downtown. We don't have that, so you're gonna end up with commercial cores and spots. So this, I think, client town center, I just don't know that it would be the only, I mean, maybe it's one of
Yeah.
an area where you're gonna see this kind of develop. But it's not the only one that, Michael's talking, if a town's been there since 1870 and you have it downtown, it's gonna
much different.
merge, right? You probably have old homes right next to it that are a little bit, so your density ends up being kind of ringed around it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of an interesting animal, but this one is new.
I know that I had a question for the council on 3.1, just the introduction, the community values, there's a bullet.
Which
list of
page?
Three,
Go back here.
let's see. Right on 3.1, introduction, I apologize, it's that first page in chapter 3.
Page, vision 3,
Yeah.
Where it says Harriman community values, and there's 6 bullet points, open spaces, active lifestyles, the outdoors, recreation, and spectacular views. I think those are all great. I'm just wondering, are there others? Or do we feel like that really is the central core values of our community.
So when I looked at this, sorry, go ahead, Steve.
No, you go
No,
first.
I love to hear your stories. Do you have a story for me?
I don't have a story.
Okay.
I think those are community elements, not
Yes.
community values. And that community value, I think our community has great values, and it's not around the views and, it's about, family and integrity and our cultural history and,
Which I think we
taking
get to in
care
a
of
lot
our
of other
community and,
other
all
places.
that kind of stuff. And those aren't necessarily unique to just Harriman, but that's the values that this community holds, right? And so, I don't know if that,
Yeah, I think a little wordsmithing, and I think you're right that there's, like, these are things that people value and why one of the reasons they choose to live in Harriman. Like, these were sort of those consistent things that popped up, but I think you're right as far as,
lifestyle ads or, something like that.
Cause you
Community
you
elements.
guys got it later in the key initiatives. The key
Right.
initiatives to me are the values. Growing wisely, optimizing our open spaces, maximizing fiscal opportunities, enhancing and supporting our community and culture. Like those
Yeah.
are our values, right? Open spaces is not, I would agree. And specifically, like when I saw spectacular views, that particular one kind of rubbed me the wrong way, simply because that's gonna come back and bite us in the butt later. But so when we want to bring in a business or an
yeah, and
office
then you're
building.
like, you're blocking my
And
spectacular
you're
view.
blocking
Yeah,
my
it's
view,
a
how
story side,
dare
yeah.
you? But it's a Waldorf Astoria, right? Like
Yeah.
just throwing it out in the wind.
Yeah.
It's a super nice facility or something, and all of a sudden everyone's saying, well, you're blocking my view, so how dare you? Look, it's in the general plan. My spectacular view is gone. What do you do? Like, no. So, is that exactly what you said? It's an element. It's one of the things that
Yeah,
our
like,
residents love.
People
Yes,
love
but-
the views out here. They love the active lifestyle. They love the outdoors and the recreation. I mean, that's part of why you want to live in Harriman. And I think you've captured key elements that contribute to the appeal of our city. I just don't know that values is the word I would use for that.
That makes sense. I think I kind of went back and forth
Okay.
on that part too. So, okay.
Again, really dogmatic, but
That's the time to.
Knowing that it's gonna get thrown back in our faces at some point.
it's probably worth it.
Well, and that's, that is the goal, is to like have something that you feel comfortable using and relying on, and that Michael and Clint can refer to in their recommendations for you as a council, when they see applications, so. Okay, so with that, is there with any of the initiatives, which, essentially are those guiding principles or community values, we talked about the one with the town center. Are there any specific issues with any of those that we wanna go back to and talk about in a little bit more detail? I know we've talked about them quite a bit in the past, and so.
I don't know if this is the right time, but on Harriman's vision, you said the vision for Harriman's future promotes the history of the community and its agricultural and rural roots. Is that really what we're doing? Is that really our vision?
So, and that's it is like a multi-part vision, I think, rather than trying to say like everything in one vision statement, which I think the city has an overall vision statement. as
We've
far as,
actually
like,
talked
serving
about
the
this.
community.
We have like 3 vision statements for it. They don't coalesce, so that's.
Mission statement and vision,
Right.
yeah, right.
And they
Mission,
don't-
there's the vision, and
I just don't like having a vision if that's not where we're going.
and I think that was one of
It's more of
the,
an illusion than a vision.
and I think that's why we're trying to catch it, like, in, while there's still gonna be growth and expansion happening, are there ways that Harriman can still value those agricultural, see
But-
if it's not.
I think that's a
Not the
really
focus.
important aspect, right? Cause there are parts in here where it talks about, and we can go through this later, but I really appreciated these action items that were related to everything.
I did too,
got some
actually,
questions about those, we can get to that in that last section, but, it talks about promoting sign design and gateway elements and, things like that throughout the community. That it would be nice if those are reflective of somehow the history of Harriman, right? The culture, the roots of the city, right? Not just, it looks great in a new thing, but there's ways to capture those elements, right? So if it's in here, I don't wanna give it just a lip service, like you're
That's what
saying,
I'm
right? That it really should be, celebrating and promoting the history and its roots. Doesn't necessarily mean we're still gonna be an agrarian community, but that's the identity out here, that's the history of it. And there's gonna be agricultural uses out here, we've got the
Right.
Butterfield Park and the rodeo grounds.
Which is something, that we heard a lot, especially when we went back out to the community in April, with all the events that John helped to coordinate. People, especially the ones that lived over by Butterfield Park, talked about why they moved here and how, Harriman is still unique with some of those more agricultural, residential lots and the ability to have the equestrian trails. And so I think, what I'm hearing is that maybe we even like some of the action items to some of the vision statements, that's like, we're gonna make, we're gonna follow up on this vision by, action item, 1,
So-
2, and 8, and
So I'm
actions.
I'm-
Like that.
my time here is quickly waning as those sitting in the gallery over there are now aware. I would say that for me, a lot of this is gonna be suggestions for me, but one of the things I would think that this body really does need to think of in regards to that is how has that vision, I think Sherry calls out a good point. It needs to be a vision, not just a nice sentiment, and if we're not, I've heard for, the Harriman feel and it's our agricultural roots. Yes, we have our agricultural roots, but when I moved here, we had, less than 25,000 residents. And when Sherry moved here, it was even less, and when Clint moved here, it was less than that. And the demographic has changed a lot, and there is not necessarily maybe the same drive to stay as tightly held to the fact that we are an agricultural society.
Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about.
But that doesn't mean that it's not an important part and something that we are
Yeah.
focusing on, making sure we maintain what we can as we grow. But every time a new development comes in,
Right, like that piece stays here, but everything else.
everything else is
still
growing
keeps
different, and so it's
on.
hard to say we're, maintaining it or whatever, like, are we being honest in that conversation? And I'm not necessarily gonna be the one that makes that decision how we do it, but are we being honest to ourselves and to our residents when we say Harriman is an agriculture community? We're not an agriculture
Well,
community.
and to be fair, the vision says to promote the history of the community's agricultural roots. It doesn't say to,
This version, yes.
like the Danzy Park will be a celebration of the roots and
Absolutely.
agricultural roots, those type of
That's-
things. So those can be tied to that. I'm fine. The other Danzys just put in a big wheel line, and not a wheel line, but a big sprinkler. It's great, a big pivot. It's like, yes, that's staying for a while, cause we spent a lot of money on that pivot.
So, I just,
but
sorry, go ahead.
it's what it is, eventually things get turned under and houses get built.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is it's not gonna remain an agricultural community forever.
Right.
And I think elements of that will be here for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But, like you go downtown Salt Lake City, this is a, big city, skyscrapers, hotels, businesses, right, that kind of stuff. But there are elements down there in art, museums, decoration, signage, historical markers, things that celebrate the history and the culture, right? And so, I think this Danzy Park thing that we're talking about, this historical park, is exactly along those
Yes.
lines, right?
Yeah.
It honors and it remembers that, and if there's other ways that we can do that, there's ideas for that, I'd like to hear that, and maybe incorporate
Yeah.
those in where we could.
Was my only thing. I just don't want it to say it's a vision if we're not,
If that's
don't have
not
an action
actually
item
everything,
tied to it, it's just words.
And frankly, that might be part of the bigger discussion as this new body comes together. That's something that I might recommend they do sooner rather than later, so that we can have that as part of moving forward, but that's up to them.
And again, there's language in several places where it talks about town center, the cultural, social hub of the city, right? And just clarifying what we mean there, right?
So the next section, chapter 4, is the policy guide, and this was a newer addition to kind of expand a little bit more on some of the priorities that were identified during the planning process. And part of the policy guide, the objective is to give planning staff and the city council and the planning commission something that's a little bit more specific to rely on when you're trying to make decisions. And so, it gives you just a little bit more details. So with that policy guide, there's the priorities that came out of the process, and there's 6 of those, the economic development, community character, community amenities, safe transportation, employment opportunities, and the mix of housing types. Within that policy guide, are there things that we wanna come back and talk about? And I think, some of it could be like clarifying some of the language, and some of it could be like, oh, we're missing, a couple of key items that we wanna incorporate in those.
I think number 4 is there has to be an element of efficiency in the transportation too, right? Safe and connected and coordinated is great, but if it's inefficient and
And it
troublesome,
takes
right,
you yeah. Yeah.
then I think that's as equally an important aspect of the safety of it, right?
Yeah.
It's efficiency.
Number 2, community character. I think this kind of goes back to maybe some of the conversation we were just having as well about what we actually intend to do. As I was looking through this, evaluate development patterns to help, oh no, that wasn't it, which one was it that I was looking at? When we talk about older conventional Harriman, and with the newer look and feel of Harriman, old and conventional, I don't know, that to me comes off wrong to our residents, right? That, oh, it's conventional, it's not what we are, it's not, you're old and conventional, you're in the past and we don't care about you. We do, and I think we've made it very clear that we do. So page policy 10, halfway down.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I don't want to signal to those residents who have been here way longer than I have, or any of us have, frankly, that we don't care about them, or we don't. It's why we made the Old Town, it's our, the historic Harriman zone, and it's all those things that we've done to protect that. I don't wanna say, well, you're just old and conventional, we're just trying to make you fit in,
Yeah.
right? Like, we need to own that in a way that is, no, you are a valued part and we want to protect you as we grow differently around you, right? And so how do we signal that? And I think that goes part of that, but like, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to keep it an agricultural community, or are we trying to protect the agricultural stuff that we have left and move forward with a new modern community that we are? Because let's be honest, that's what we are. It's one of the reasons why we're the fastest growing large city in America. How do we balance those two and put it in words so that when our residents come to us and say, what are we trying to do? No, you have to let me keep my, blah, 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 and you can't put this next to it because gosh darn it, how do we marry the two so that both are valued and part of our community? That was my concern with this particular chapter.
Okay.
Mayor, let me ask a question. And Susie, when I read this, I was thinking more about how do we create transitional land use or development patterns between our more established conventional neighborhoods and what sometimes can be a very abrupt change into these new higher density multifamily neighborhoods. Is that what you were trying to get at, is how do we make that transition so that they feel
Feels
more
natural.
connected, it's more more natural?
And I think some of that
Transition.
is, the connections, whether it's the street network or the urban form or
Yeah.
the sidewalk patterns, it is, what are ways to make them feel less disparate?
To make them feel like one community, not two separate communities that happen to be right next to each other.
Yeah.
And certainly not intended to change those historic patterns, right? We do wanna celebrate those and preserve those. Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, you're calling exactly right. I walked from my in-laws' house to my house the other day, and it's night and day. Literally walking across the street can make the night and day difference between what our historic residents feel and what they know and what some areas still are to my neighborhood, which is entirely different. And it's literally just across the street. I have goats as I leave my neighborhood, and I love it. I love the goats. I love the horses. I love everything right there with the barbed wire fence. It's one of the things I do love. but it is night and day difference, and it's very abrupt.
Yeah. And while this may be difficult or impossible to really reapply to existing development patterns, it may help us when we're working with a new development or a developer saying, look, we need to be aware of this, that we're looking for, how do we make that transition in a healthier pattern?
How do we
healthier way?
include them into the process as opposed to just doing it without them? Which we've gotten a
In
lot
spite
better.
of them or in opposition to them,
Yeah,
right?
which we've gotten a lot better over the last several years, but we still need to always do better.
Are there other,
So what was the intention of saying achieve a balance of smaller lots and mid-sized lots in new neighborhoods? Why do we not say anything about large lots?
It does.
It's above that.
Two above that, larger homes and lots.
I know, but it says,
Talks a little bit about that.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
I did, but for me, I see the cherry pickers coming out and saying this is what I want, right?
yeah,
Like, so for me, it's not that, you know, it's not in there, it's that when we're talking about things like that, the intent is to have the mix of all of them. So what I'd foresee is a developer coming in and saying, you want a mix of smaller and mid-sized lots, that's what you say right here in the, well, yeah, but two above it, it says that, well, it says, you know, that, not saying that any particular developer would do that, but it's not like I haven't seen it before.
right, yeah. So I think just clarifying that that's not all new neighborhoods, but the ones that are sort of the
In
lower
addition,
medium
in
density.
addition to smaller, you know, in addition to larger lots, you know, finding a balance of mid and side, you know, in new neighborhoods, that, you know, just so that it's clear that this isn't a one-off thing. I'm thinking with trying to defend this to a resident's
Yeah,
Uh,
hat right now.
Yeah, because because of our location and the amenities that are here, I think there is still a market and a desire for, I don't know, I might call them more like small estates,
Yeah,
you know, right?
absolutely.
Like acre to 2.5 acre type of things, right? And they're not all gonna be in subdivisions, right? But, you know, and South Hills with some of the stuff's going on up there's gonna be some bigger lots up on the hill, right? And, you know, there might be opportunities farther west or northwest or, you know, just,
that was definitely.
there's an element of that I think still,
too.
now, will is that gonna be the majority of our community as far as units? Obviously not.
Right.
But it still should be an element of our planning and considerations.
And I think that that is a great point, that it's like, hey, you know, maybe you've got a neighborhood that's 30 acres and there's gonna be 3 of those larger lots that are more of an estate lot, and the balance of them are gonna be, you know, the quarter.
But it helps, because so many of these larger projects come in with an MDA. I mean, so many of them come with an MDA, and having that here to go back and as the residents are coming and saying, this, being able to poke out and pull out that bit that's clear that we want all 3 of these,
Yeah.
as opposed to just this one, or
Right,
just
pod,
focusing.
pod, pod.
Like, it's,
Yeah.
I value calling each thing out specifically, but particularly in the things that come to density, making sure that we are clear that we intend to do all of them, not just 1 or 2, not just all large lots, cause there's no way we could just do large lots, right?
Yeah.
Not just small lots, not all medium, like, we do want that mix, but calling them all out together, I think would be helpful, as we show what our intent actually is.
We don't define those anywhere. We say mid-sized lot.
We don't, and that was, you know, a thought is that, you know, some of these, we might even be able to link to
Good call out.
a future land use chapter.
When you say large lot, it probably depends on where you're coming from. Quarter
Right.
acre is a large lot in a lot of places.
Yeah.
But that might not be what you're thinking.
And a lot of people here would not consider that anything more than a mid-sized lot,
Yeah.
right?
It also comes up for an overlay zone for large animal rights. Where is that?
You could do like an infographic, maybe even based on an inventory of development pattern in
Yeah.
Harriman or.
I think we can link it more closely to the future land use categories, but it's,
I said, I look at that and I think mid-sized lot means something different, large lot,
Yeah.
depending on your perspective coming in. So
You're coming
you
from New York City,
Right, I was gonna say, it's like,
massive
high
lot,
density in
yeah.
Harriman
Yeah.
is like the.
Would it be better to maybe refer to that as density, as the mayor was
Ooh,
talking about?
ooh, you're using a dirty word. Density is not a dirty word, but
Maybe not density, but I don't know.
Land use intensities.
yeah, there you go.
It's, I know,
I'm just envisioning like a little.
I like the infographic.
Yeah, right.
Because you're right, like how many the new standard lot is what, you know? It's 6,000 square feet, right? That most people are gonna start calling as a mid-sized lot, right? That's not a mid-sized lot. To us, that is very much a small lot. And so making sure that that's clear that 6 to 8,000 is a small lot and it's gotta be, at least this.
4,500 means, I mean,
Yeah.
that, you're seeing that just because the cost of infrastructure and
Yeah.
development.
Yeah.
Which there is absolutely a place for, I absolutely agree that we should have that. I started in town, I absolutely understand it, I absolutely agree we need to have it. The question is, if we just say a mid-sized lot, when we leave things for interpretation, it's always going to be interpreted in the favor of the developer.
Yeah, I'm looking at that, I don't know what that means, mid-sized or large, or again, it's all gonna be your perspective.
That's a good call, thank you.
And this is a little bit off topic, but it's germane to this, is in the language that, our politicians and community activists use, they use this term affordable housing, right? And they're using that term as a replacement for what we mean as low-income housing, right? There is low-income housing, there's moderate-income housing. But people that are 100% of the median, or 125% of the median, or 150% of the median income, they have homes that they want, that they can afford, that there's a demand for those too, right? So when we talk about housing affordability, that is an element of housing across the entire economic spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And as a community, I think it's especially in a general plan, I think there's wisdom in incorporating that full spectrum of housing in our plans. That we as a community want people to be able to start, grow, advance, when they're at the peak of their economic, all the way to retirement and beyond, right? We want people to be able to live their whole life cycle in Harriman and have all of those choices.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and a lot of the data
Only the ones that
shows
the
that
council
too, that
received,
there's
and
the
we
ability
have it
for,
electronically.
people in Harriman to upsize and get into a bigger house, which, then helps to free up some of those smaller homes. So you wanna see that cycle, and people have said that
Eventually
they,
downsize, right?
you go up
Yeah,
and
it is.
then you kind of come back down,
Right.
so.
When I lived in townhomes, we had lots of people that were
All the way into the century, right?
Would the council be interested
So we have hospital now, a
adding
birth,
a statement or
Lifespan.
comment about single-family detached cottage development? This is something that Sherry and I have talked a little bit about. I think in a limited form, there may be a place for that type of development for workforce housing that is detached. We're getting
I agree.
a lot of affordable or lower, lower priced townhome product, but they're also really big, right?
I know.
They're bigger than my home. And I live in a smaller
Yeah.
home, but even smaller, I think there might be an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I mean,
And have that range
there's
of housing.
2,800 square foot townhouses,
Townhomes,
right?
right.
Yeah.
You're talking about,
No,
12 to
I
1,400 square foot
before we
type of house.
added
Yeah.
on to my home growing up, I think we were originally 800 square feet, we had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. We had 6 people, then we turned the garage into a bedroom and then added a family
Right.
room on the back. And we were on the same size lot I was on Friendship, which was like 0.17 or something acres. But because the footprint of the house is smaller, we still have a yard, we still
Right,
had a garden, we still did all kinds of things in our yard, right? We still could put a trampoline in there if we want, but we have those size lots now, and the footprint of the home is so big that there is absolutely no use of the yard. And I think that we've created
it's
this.
just the buffer between the houses.
Yeah, exactly, it's the, you can share sugar through the windows, whatever you need, right? But I think that we've created some sort of this idea in, I don't know, this is just my own thinking, in maybe our city, our country, I don't know where, I hear all this all the time, it's not fair, or young kids can't afford a new home, and it's like, why should your young kids be able to afford a 3,000 square foot home? I started in an apartment in the basement of somebody's house, you know what I mean? It's like, is that the expectation? But we don't have any inventory that would allow them to have a home. Like I said, it was 800 square feet when we started, we added on to it a little bit, so that as we grew a little bit, we could have, 2 bathrooms instead of one with 6 people. That was miserable, but you know what I mean, there's this expectation, and I think that we've overshot by too much. That's why, even though I don't like that the state mandated us to go with 1,000 square feet, it's good policy. There's no reason that they're mandating 2,500 square feet on a single family home. It's in my mind, it's okay to have smaller houses, especially if they're not on a really, really tiny lot, but a lot that's smaller, but can still provide, you can go in the backyard and play if you need.
Yeah, and I think you see, some examples of that housing where you've got that, that 6,000 square foot lot, but the houses are just a little bit smaller and it gives more of a yard and a little bit more buffer, so just the neighborhood takes on like a little bit of a different feel, even though, from a lot size perspective, it's the same, the
And-
look is just very.
And I absolutely agree with Sherry, 100%. The one thing that, and this kind of moves on to item 3 of this, community amenities, amenities.
See you in a meeting.
I personally feel that as a body and as a community, we feel that all of our residents have, I would call it a right to open space. Like, in all honesty, to me, it's a right? You should have, every resident who lives in our community should have access to green space, to something, right? And other members of the body may not agree with me, but for me, I would almost like to see that be a little bit more clear as we talk about that is it truly is a core giving reasonable, within reasonable distances. Because as we talk about these big developments, one of the things we talked about really big with Olympia, right, was making sure that we have a park within essentially walking distance of every residence. And I came from a place where the closest real city park was, substantially farther than what even the city considers walking distance. And that I've always struggled with, because we put 400 units on this piece of land and then didn't give them a city park that they could walk to. And, there's HOA property and this and that, and fine, I get that argument, but to me, I would almost like to see us a little bit more clear that we intend to make that, a priority as we have these discussions. Not because because we feel it's important, right? And I think that every resident, it's the only thing I've ever heard residents say that they're willing to spend more money on is the parks. Literally, the only thing I've ever heard them say, don't, charge me more on my park fee. What? That's the only thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, so 2 comments to that. I think that right to open space, I'm not even sure that's too hyperbolic. That there's something about that that's meaningful, right? And we've talked about it over and over again as a body, that the need for that increases as land use intensity increases, right? That there's even a bigger need for those, right? There has to be an outlet. It's part of a healthy lifestyle, which is what we've been talking about through this whole general plan too, right? So, yeah, I think a key element of us working to preserve and promote not just open space, but usable green recreation, relaxing public spaces, right? Those kind of things.
And sorry, I before I forget, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about that is because when we talk about 1,000-foot units, I guarantee you that they're not gonna come in on the same size land, right? As we talk about 1,000-size units, the reason it's been 6,000 or 8,000-foot units is because that's what you need to build the land, or build the building, right? If we are using 1,000-square-foot buildings, they're gonna be 2,000 square foot pieces of property. That, in my opinion, is absolutely not enough green space to say they have their own green space in their own backyard, they should use it, right?
That was the point of it. When Michael and I talked about this quite some time ago, I was like, I never ever went to the park when I was growing up, ever.
But you had a yard.
Play in your yard.
Yeah.
Threw the baseball around.
And we all played in our yard, and we didn't have big lots. You know, 0.17, they're still pretty small lots,
But I think if we get even smaller, which is what I think is gonna happen.
if we allow it.
And
That's the problem, is that we just continue to allow it.
6,500 square feet, something like that, yeah, so it's not a huge
Well,
lot, yeah.
you
But
say
if we
if
continue to allow it if we zone appropriately and have restrictions on those kinds of things, then we accomplish that. And I'm not saying that I'm opposed to parks at all.
I know you're not.
They're important for our community, but I also believe that there's budget parameters and things like that come into parks. O&M is huge on our parks. And so even though it's important to provide that for community purposes and things like that, it's also important for us to say, okay, well then let's look at some of our zoning restrictions and things like that to say, hey, have a smaller house on, they can still be the same size lots we're having, just shrink your footprint. So you can go, literally, I drive by, not that a trampoline is the biggest deal, but you could not put a trampoline in the back of many of the yards in our city. And it's like, they're a big nice house, but that's why it necessitates the need for all these parks. And everyone in the community has to pay for those parks, just, you know what I mean? And it's like, so if you have a place that,
just like everybody in the community has to pay for the roads.
exactly, but if you have a place where you have, that you don't use them, then that's like, yeah, I'm still paying.
Oh, sure, yeah,
I don't think we're necessarily,
yeah,
I think
disagree,
there are two different
Yeah.
ways to achieve the same
sure.
goal, right? And there's pros and cons of both. I would say, you and I had a conversation about this concept, you know, a little while ago, and I'm really enthusiastic about this idea. And I don't know if it's a different zone we wanna consider, right? A cottage zone or something, and we can create the requirements around that, right? Lot size and square footage and footprint of size, right? But I mean, you think about where some of the most desirable neighborhoods in the whole area are. You go up to the avenues, there's these old, small brick houses, right? But the streets are tree lined and,
Yeah.
beautiful, and they have not big backyards, they have nice little backyard, enough room to throw a football around and kick the soccer ball and play with the dog, you know, and those can be very appealing, attractive, great things, and I think that it's another way of achieving affordability for moderate and lower income families without packing them all together in Lego boxes, you know?
and I agree, and I actually agree with Sherry on this, like, yes, like, we don't, if they have the yards, my biggest concern really is the state coming in and saying, well, we said you can't, you have to mandate this size of house. What's to stop them from coming in next time and saying, you have to mandate, you cannot mandate a lot size of larger than this, right?
Well, nothing, but.
And that's where, for me, it's like, if our plan, and we're putting in the general plan, and we're saying this is what we want, yeah, that might change, but at least long-term, we can try to move towards that goal, you know, and for as long as we can until that does change, because frankly, I see that will eventually change regardless. So.
There's another product type that has come up before is units that are built with an ADU as part of it, right? And I think that's gonna have a much bigger application in the future.
Yes, I agree.
So, cause that's an element to create a more affordable unit, right? A person can own the home and then receive rental income, and it's part of the design, it's part of how the parking is set up, it's part of how the community is organized. And so, I would just say, I don't know exactly how we captured it, but there's a lot of creative solutions to these problems that are being dismissed in favor of what's a easy political agenda to push, right? And I'm much more, I think it behooves this body, and I think this body has proven out, we're much more interested in solution-based ideas than
Yes.
politically popular ideas, right? So let's look at those things that are actually going to make a difference.
Hey, Jared,
Jared just left. Just barely.
I was like, we've got a long time without talking to Jared, so if he just left,
Cause I got
Sorry.
crowd.
He just barely texted, I gotta go.
Okay. Well, we appreciate his participation up to this point, his attendance. That was my thought on community amenities, is just making sure that we don't. I don't know, that's my thoughts, but somebody else.
Michael,
might
is
think
this dialogue helpful to you?
Yes.
You guys, is
Yes.
this
Yeah.
more incorporating council vision on top of this, right, you know?
Yeah, and I think, the more specific and reliable you can make the general plan, then the better tool it is
Yeah.
for you and for the planning department to be able to, evaluate things so that when they come to you, it's easy for them to say, I get, this is part of the general plan and, here's how we've evaluated it, and then the applicant also feels like they've been given a fair evaluation, that it's not just, sort of this subjective back and forth process, so. The more, we might even be able to condense some of these and just say, more specific things, in fewer statements. So, sometimes that, trying to say more with less is a longer
love that.
process than just
Yeah.
saying everything. And that's always been my goal with general plans, is like, you don't wanna end up with 380 goals, objectives, and policies that you can't even begin to administer, so.
No, we just want one, right? Make
Yeah.
everybody happy and do it perfectly and always, that's all we gotta do,
Yeah,
right?
I love condensing it into something much simpler. Part of the thinking behind that too is there are a few still, there are very few pieces of land left in our city that are not entitled.
Yeah.
It's nice to talk about, oh, we could do this or we could do this, but there is such little land mass left that's not entitled, so it's like, let's simplify this to what we have now. I'm not saying that as you go forward, things won't change a little bit, but we're still ways out of redeveloping anything. So,
Sure, and I really appreciate what you're saying, cause we gave that feedback early on, right? Because there were a lot of the initial survey questions that sounded like what you would do if you were building a community from scratch, right? And that wasn't really reflective of what we can accomplish as a city from here on out. But I still think there's value in including elements of this in here, right? Condensing it, but including those elements. Because when MDA modification requests come in and people wanna make changes and rearrange things and stuff, this becomes a guidebook for, okay, we'll make these changes, or we'll accept some of these changes. We'd like you to incorporate some of these elements in your design as well. Can we accomplish some of these goals while we're helping you achieve your goals, right? But there's ways that we can help achieve this goal and make it a part of what we're doing to accommodate market changes and all that other stuff too, right?
For sure. I agree with that completely. My point was just simply, let's just make sure it's condensed enough that it doesn't take us 16 years to read through it and then it loses its value anyway.
Yeah.
There's not a positive definition of verbose in the dictionary, so.
One of the things I do wanna move on to is, for safe transportation choices. And it may make sense to put that in this scenario, one policy 18 page. I could, as I was going through here, I couldn't necessarily find anything that specifically called out safe walking routes. And we talk about Harriman will enhance bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, this and that. In all honesty, I would like to see safe walking routes called out specifically in our general plan.
Okay.
We've had some issues where things have changed in the city, the district has made a change, all of a sudden we're looking at putting kids on a highway. And that is, I think all of us would consider it unacceptable, so for
And
me,
I
just
think
having it
we
in there would be
I have
helpful.
a question about that though. Do we really even play a role in that? I know our police department does, but do us as a body play any role in safe walking?
Yeah, I mean, look at the Harriman Highway, like having to put that on and try to get funds for that is something we have to do because that's the only safe walking route for some of those children.
We don't make those
Part of it is the
decisions,
transportation
right?
committee, right? So a
Yeah.
member of this body serves on that committee and that's where complaints and things like that
Do we
are
make
partly
those
resolved.
decisions?
I think with new development, you do have a lot of power in that because you can look and see new
Right.
development in school and the general plan can help guide some ideas or some requirements for new development. For existing development, it's a little bit tougher, but But where the general plan is typically done.
So just with the new stuff, cause I'm like, seems like every time there's a problem, it just simply bypasses us and goes
A lot of
straight
times
to
it
the
does, yeah.
back beat.
On the new on the new problems, yeah, but if we call it out in our plan and say this is something we focus on, and I want, as we're talking about transportation stuff they're looking through, we need to make sure we don't miss this one.
Yeah, I think Blake, though, what you said is good, there's new problems in old developments, and we just have to work with those, right? But if we can try and avoid new problems and new developments, that's a
Make
better
it
idea.
part of our planning process.
Yeah.
And then, just with all of them, when you're talking about the entitlements, that, I think Steve, you're right, and, the idea of the general plan is that, like you're entitled to the development units, but if there's still some flexibility in what's gonna go where and how it's gonna look, that's where the general plan can be a guide, for that part of the process too, is it's going from sort of that conceptual level to more specific,
And
site plans.
I don't know if this is, I mean, know a lot of this is dead to a lot of it, but in a lot of it's safer walking routes, access for our fire, access for our police departments, making sure that that's something that we plan out accordingly, making sure, we always have the goal, the fire department has a goal of a certain time limit to get to every, I don't know if there's a good way to include that or not, but public safety and ensuring that our transportation facilitates public safety is for me something, and that may even be at the top, talking about in addition to parks and open spaces to provide buffers and access to public, for public safety or whatever. But to me, that's, I've said it 100 times, the very first rule of the city is to provide for public safety. Above everything else is public safety. And so for me, especially in regards to transportation, leaving that out to me is missing something.
So this plan, as we know, is an overarching plan, and we do have other master plan elements. And Susie's linked some of those here in the right-hand column. For example, our active transportation master plan. But I'm wondering, Susie, could we have, as one of our policies and strategies here, that Harriman will implement the policies recommended or identified in the active transportation master plan?
Yeah.
Cause that's where our pedestrian network.
Where it really
language
does come
really
into
is identified,
detail.
Yeah, but one of our goals is we're making sure that we're referring to that or we're implementing that when we do development review.
That might be a great way to do
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
But specifically implementing that, including safe walking around, public
Yeah,
safety,
yeah.
this, like.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's okay to be a little repetitive for those
Yes.
things that are key
Okay.
issues, so.
And if I might, just as a sidebar here, there's a quick. Something that's not a part of this plan, and I don't know if it should be or how we would incorporate it. But is we had, in one of the committees that Sherry and I are serving on with, the internet task force, there's the scope of that discussion has expanded substantially. And I think that there are elements of technology that should be considered and leveraged in our future plans. Smart city type of things, how that can improve efficiencies and community response times and water use and, all of that kind of stuff, right? And it can also serve as a backbone for the transportation things that are mentioned in here as key elements of the higher land use intensities, right? We said we're gonna coordinate development with transportation. Well, if it's just more roads, that's silly, right? But if we're talking about coordinating it with smart transportation, I know UTA is really active and developing these, autonomous shuttle things, right? And there's a lot of that stuff that could be leveraged if technology is included in this plan. And so, I don't wanna derail this or create this huge other work effort, but I think something about that needs to be a part of this plan. And included in, cause it's like this, like it says in the beginning, this isn't just about land use,
Yeah.
right? This is about the whole vision for the city. And something about that should be included.
Well, and maybe having that as one of those brief top things that we touch on and then
Yeah.
including that in the transportation plan. Like
In
I'm,
what's called the values,
Yeah.
right?
but I don't disagree with you in that at all.
Is that,
No, I agree.
okay,
I know I'm moving forward. Do we have anything on employment opportunities? we can kind of move through this,
Get more.
get more. I was pretty,
Or just, we could just like.
See how you can connect the whole thing, get more.
6, mix of housing, the same issue I had up on, you know, the
Yeah,
making
I was
sure-
kind of making some.
like
notes,
making
but I
sure
think a lot
that
of
just
those-
mirrors back and forth is my only real
Yeah.
issue with that.
And I think that that technology piece we talked about ties into a lot of these,
Yeah.
right, it's
That
a
might be
piece
a
like
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
developing economic opportunities, da-da-da.
Yeah, we'll figure out a way, and it could even be a key initiative, like,
Yeah.
in a smart city.
It's the same here as far as definitions, I think we just said that as far as larger, smaller,
Yeah.
we're fine.
Cause let's be honest, the majority of what we will end up seeing this is in regards to development and how, and density, like in all honesty. When projects come, this is when we will see it back in front of us with the residents being like, well, you said this, which is what we want them to do, right?
Right.
You know, I think there's a piece of this, I would say it this way. If a business is gonna be moving into Harriman, I would like Harriman to be a place where the CEO and the entry-level clerk can both live in our city.
agree.
Does that make sense? That they're both wanting to be here because of what the community offers.
That's why sometimes when you go through these processes and people, this narrative, I've heard it at the state level too, this narrative that nobody wants bigger, larger lots, nobody wants these kind of things, it's like.
That's absolutely not true.
It's simply not true.
And the people who are saying that live in bigger houses on larger lots.
Exactly.
Right.
Or in the avenues.
Right.
Or
in the avenues, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Simply not true.
And you're in Capitol Hill, like, who needs more than 4 acres and 9,000 square feet? I mean, that's ridiculous.
The number of parking stalls we could have around the Capitol for that much space.
So let's talk a little bit about the action plan. I think we've gone through some of these before, and the way they're set up, because I think, Clint and Michael had this question, is that, these are, giving just an overview of a next step or a follow-up item. So, if it gives a little bit of detail, regarding design guidelines or standards, just clarifying that's not the design standards, it's saying these are things to include in developing a design standard, document or policy. So these are sort of the descriptive of what that follow-up action item would be. And I think, as far as what's included, we went through these in fairly good detail with the planning commission early on. I think I would say that there might be a couple others that have come up in our discussions that we might want to add into this action plan. And I think that would be the main question for you. Is there anything missing from the action plan, things that have come up, follow-up items that?
We actually have to stop what we're doing and we have to wait for Steve to come back.
I would,
Okay.
who's here in the city to find,
So we, like I said, we have to wait until Steve comes back.
You can keep talking,
Yeah.
you just can't take any action without a call.
Are you sure?
like who is.
Okay, alright.
Does
So
that
Michael
make
actually
sense?
had that question sheet, he's like, a lot of it says like Harriman will, or Harriman City will.
You can't take any action.
And I think
You
it's
mean-
not intended to be like all, this is the city's responsibility, but this is what Harriman City wants to help make happen. And some of that, is on the city side, and some of it is on the developer side or, property owner side, as they're
Like
building
these
and making things
reviews,
happen.
who needs to be responsible for that, and should that be articulated in here, should we say? Or does it just need, is broad encompassing fine?
And it's essentially, if you're looking at, I think the first one was review the map annually or biannually. Once it annually or biannually,
Yeah, being
Yeah,
a little more
essentially.
specifically.
that's gonna be planning, is gonna have to put on a calendar and bring it. I'm assuming it would normally probably go to your planning commission if you're doing a
We're not gonna give them.
It depends on how often you really need to look at this map. I think the idea that you're looking at it annually,
Yeah,
will probably over time drop to
Biannually.
well, and it could even be, it's like, hey, we're looking at, we don't have any changes, so.
the way it's written here, biannually means twice a year, and you would probably say biennially, that would mean once every 2 years.
Yes.
Just as a matter of,
formatting, so are these different colored sections supposed to represent the previous issues?
The colored sections,
Like,
if I'm remembering,
Future land use.
I had that same question when I was reading it. I think there's sort of the policy ones,
yeah,
and then there's more of the program ones.
and that's what I think, like community character, I think that's what they're trying, maybe,
But yeah,
if we're trying to group them into specific, maybe just clear, like, it just got a little.
I had that,
weird.
I had that same thought as I said.
Help me understand action item developing neighborhood plans. Like, what exactly do we mean by that?
So that is just taking a more specific look at a specific neighborhood where you might wanna get into a little bit more detail about street improvements, or if it's an area that might see some change, introduce a neighborhood node, maybe something small is gonna change, but you wanna know a little bit more.
For example, you might do a specific area plan for just Old Town, for example.
It's usually, you see it in older areas when you're looking at a neighborhood, it's very unique, and so you wanna keep that characteristic.
Which is why we made Old Town, yeah,
You
for
would
that
do so.
exact reason.
So here, that's one, but over time, somebody fast forwards 50 years, somebody may do a plan for town center, specific, looking at it as it's aging and changing, how do you deal with it? But we're pretty new, so.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it could even be, as simple as.
Will be gone before
Like,
that.
what type of landscaping, trees do you wanna see in this neighborhood? I think there's just an initiative, and, for some neighborhoods, it could be pretty simple, and for others, there's gonna be a little bit more going on, so I think just kind of having that opportunity for some type of neighborhood level oversight and community engagement, leveraging the community facilitator program, how is that something that can maybe translate into a more established neighborhood council system?
The way I look at it and the way I read it on that is that we are going to do that for all neighborhoods. And maybe clarifying that a little bit, that where it makes sense, or like, well, we can use that as a tool, as opposed to.
So it's as needed,
As
right?
needed, as opposed to, we're gonna do this for all neighborhoods. Cause the way I read it, I can see a resident coming in and saying, where's my neighborhood plan? Right? Like, I live in Rosecrest Village, where's my neighborhood plan? Well, that's an HOA.
Yeah.
But to them, it's their neighborhood, right? So, I just, that one gives me a little bit pause of, making it a tool as opposed to something we're doing for all neighborhoods when some may not need it.
And that was the intent, so I think that's good.
Yeah. On creating design standards. I like creating design standards, but I would also, how do we keep them updated? Right? Cause as much as I love Hardy Board, give it another 10 years and there's somebody in the back of the room laughing at me because he knows I'm right.
Cedar Shakes are gonna come back, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
And then it's gonna be slate roofs again, and then it's gonna be, like we're gonna continue to have change, and design standards are important because it keeps consistency, but we also do need to make sure that we're taking the time to review them on a fairly regular basis. I would say that maybe need to be slower than maybe looking at the land use map. I think maybe every other year, would be a much more realistic number on that one.
Or whenever the legislature comes out with it.
And says you have to change it anyway, yeah, exactly. But just making sure that we say this is not our permanent design standards forever, we're willing to make changes. And we're going to review it eventually, maybe just not right now when you want. I don't know, I keep jumping in here, but I don't know if you guys.
No, I had a question about some of these too, a fiscal impact calculator.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, that sounds snazzy,
We could be developing one for a very long time.
right?
Yeah.
To be honest, it's a spreadsheet on Alan's computer, so we probably already have it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's something, and some of these, like you said, it's there might be versions of this, but making them tools, it's like, okay, and so for example, there's an area where, somebody's like, oh, I wanna do, just tilt up flex warehouse instead of retail. You've got the guidelines, but if you've got the fiscal impact calculator, then you kind of, it's like, oh, this is a 4-acre lot, and if we change the use, our revenue from taxes is going to go from here to here, or it's gonna, start off low, but get high. And so just understanding, what the impact of those land use decisions.
And this is
I
a newer trend maybe, and it hasn't quite established yet. But there's been more conversation in the development and finance community about doing this kind of analysis. And I think it's something we're going to be seeing
We just
regionally.
directed our staff to do exactly that.
I'm
Yeah.
seriously, because in the private sector, you have to do a financial analysis on every project you do, right? And
Guarantee you the developers are doing it.
yeah, right, everything they do, they're penciling out, figuring out if we do this and use these materials and it takes this long and all, right? They're calculating, ROI and time values and all that kind of stuff. So, as a city though, and in civic municipal settings, that kind of analysis really isn't done very much. I'm not saying that that's a driving force for all of our decisions, but I think it should be
an
in
influence-
consideration for
it's an
all of our
influencing
decisions,
factor
right?
for sure,
Yeah, it should
yeah.
be considered.
Yeah,
And I think reports and analysis and disclosure of that as part of all of these land use changes and decisions is something that I'd like to see a part of the staff reports that we get.
I think that's what you saw with Alan's analysis on Olympia Hills, right?
Yeah.
Here's what we
Right.
think, these are all guesstimates and, I this is probably the thing the legislature would hate us to do, because they're telling us we don't need commercial, it's just all housing, right? You don't need that.
And to be able to throw numbers in there, into their conversation doesn't go over well, yeah.
yeah.
They hate it when we give them
Dang
supporting data.
facts.
Well, 60% of our housing is high density, shocker.
And I think, with residential housing, for example, I think South Jordan, has used a fiscal impact calculator for, like the last decade or more. And so anytime development comes in, they run the numbers. And, with that city, they find that like anything kind of like 4 to 6 dwelling units per acre and under, like, didn't pay for itself, as far as infrastructure. When you got up over, 20 units an acre, you tend to use more services, and so that was a huge impact. And there's kind of that middle area, with residential development where that kind of balance of the infrastructure and the cost and the services you need to provide, are brought back to the city by, the property taxes or just the ability to attract adjacent retail. And so that's how they used their fiscal impact calculator, is just a both guide their general plan process, but also, as developments came in, they were able to say, it's like, oh, well, we've already got infrastructure in here, so this one's gonna work out, but, this is complete new areas, we need to think a little bit more about how we structure our impact fees and requests.
Yeah, and I'd really be interested in that kind of a calculation too, because my guess is that analysis would not just be an S-curve where this is where we should build to optimize, right? I think there'll be
Right.
multiple
There's
peaks in
lots of
that analysis,
factors.
right? Where this is a good zone and this is a good zone and this is a good zone, and we wanna avoid those places in between there.
Okay. Moving on to the next one, action item, updating zoning ordinance to support mix of housing types. I like that you call out the missing middle, but then you specifically go on to say medium single lots detached around 0.10 to 0.20 acre lots. Is that what we consider the middle size units?
It's not necessarily the middle, but it is kind of it's the size that's missing. So we did a lot of
Yeah.
analysis when we were working with the planning commission, just to show it's like, well, where are all of your units, and, a ton in that, 3 to 6,000 square foot lot. And then more as you get to the quarter acre and above, but it was that in between zone,
Okay.
where,
Yeah,
that was Harriman's missing middle, I guess.
okay.
We don't have much in that 6 to 10,000 square foot range.
Yeah,
We have 6,000 and below and 10,000 and above, but you're right, there is a missing part.
Okay, that makes more sense, and when I read it, I was thinking, that to me sounded like a medium-sized lot as opposed to, you know, missing middle, medium, like I could see other people making that mistake too. But we might address that with the infographic of saying what we actually think or, and then again, like, yeah, missing middle, but to fill out, like, enroll to fill out that whole range of all options. That's what we're missing, like, just clarifying, that's what we're trying to do with that.
Kevin?
I did have one question about this though. So a part of me wants to applaud the idea of including senior housing in as a part of all of our developments going forward. I'm curious, is that just a personal preference thing, or is there data around that suggests this is better for communities, better for seniors?
Or is it just cheaper because you don't have to put in sidewalks?
Yeah, right. I mean, should they be, is there a benefit to senior communities where they're closer together to provide amenities and services and things like that? Or, I'm not saying I'm opposed to either one. I'm not sure if there's any data that supports why we would do this as opposed to just preference or curiosity.
There's actually, we were talking earlier about having a range of housing and life cycle within Harriman. If we can even have that within a neighborhood, there is data that supports that translates into a healthier quality life cycle.
But you're not talking exclusive senior neighborhoods, and then
No.
you're talking about, it is a mix, providing those housing
Right.
types within
Right.
one neighborhood.
Right, so in an area around like a village center or a town center, you would have all these multiple housing
Ideally.
types
That would be
spread
the
out through the
ideal.
whole area. Okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to an active adult community.
Yeah, and I think there's benefits for those,
Oh,
right? I
sure.
mean, there's reasons to have those kind of communities and what they add.
approved
It's just-
several, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, my team, just this last week, we studied some material on this particular topic. Coincidentally, we didn't,
Yeah.
yeah.
We prepped them and we told them, no. Were you looking to give some direction there, or are you just asking a
No,
question?
I guess my direction would be, I'd like the policies, especially the action item things, to be driven by data versus preference, if that
Yes.
makes sense, right? I
Okay.
mean,
Yes.
even us as a council, we will throw out our preferences and our ideas, what we think.
And then we're asking you to
And
show
then
us
we're
that the
asking you to
data
give us the
supports it or
data to
doesn't.
prove that we're right, you know?
And it should be, give us the data to prove we're right or wrong, but
We're never wrong.
we're never wrong.
We were just
I
mistaken.
know. You give me enough data points and I can pull something that supports mine. Alright,
Does that make sense? I guess that's clear.
Yeah.
I did wanna talk about the next item. This one gives me substantial pause. Establish transfer of development rights. That's a big deal, in my opinion. Like saying that we're going to establish that. We've run into a couple of issues with some of these development agreements where trying to do that has caused issues where developers have tried to claim the same density on both sides of the argument. Well, I'm getting land, so now I get to I get more density on this property, and, well, I'm giving up the land, but I'm not giving up my density, so I still get to put that density somewhere else, so they're double dipping on that density. And I think that having policies and things in place in regards to that is smart and wise planning. Transfer of rights makes me nervous, right? The contract that we come up with in an NDA is designed to be a contract with that particular developer. And allowing that developer to transfer those rights to a third party on a mass scale makes me very, very, very nervous. That would be our opportunity to come in and say, we don't like it, we want to have something different, we want to renegotiate. Now, at the same time, do I see the wisdom in allowing them the ability to transfer those rights? Absolutely. There is some value to that because they might have some better, might make it easier for them to go sell a project, right? Go get commercial development, whatever, but this one gives me pause, considering I don't think we've had a in-depth discussion on what as a body as to what we want to do in regards to that.
Yeah, and in this, having the title is a little different than what the body says, right? The body is talking about establishing a mechanism for TDR, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's value in having that discussion about the mechanism.
Yes.
But we haven't had that discussion yet,
And say we're going to develop it before we even had that conversation, to me, gives me a lot of pause.
And this is a big topic. TDRs are in the current general plan. I was concerned about having open space on property that may be otherwise developable. And if we really do want to preserve that as open space and not buy it, of course, we know we can't buy everything we hope to preserve as open space. How do we incentivize that? And TDRs is one of those tools.
So I think, and so.
But you're right, we need to have more conversation
So,
about that.
Considering establishing or
Yeah, or just
Or
evaluating.
But establishing TDRs
Okay.
is we are making a declarative statement, and that to me,
We need to have more conversation
we need to
on
have
it.
and that conversation is not gonna happen with me at this point, right? Like, that conversation is gonna happen with a different member of this body. But I think it's only fair to have that conversation with them before we put this in and say, we're gonna do this.
would it be inappropriate to recommend that we have staff come back with a report on that?
I would love that,
For a
actually.
work meeting discussion?
It is a big topic, but yes.
Schedule
Yes,
that
we do need
sometime.
to-
I would recommend even
Yeah.
maybe possibly after the legislative session.
Yeah.
Like start putting it together, and then after the legislative session, let's start working and trying to, I don't know, it's your guys'.
Yeah, it concerns me also, simply because I've heard this echoed many times here about it's not a big deal, they'll never be able to build that many units anymore.
Well, and
I
if you
heard
give
that all
them
the
the,
time.
if you give them this,
And if we give
then-
them the transferable right, then
Guess what, they will
they
figure out a
could
way to do
figure
it,
out,
yeah.
put them anywhere else in the city, so if we're planning for certain land uses and certain populations and things like that, and then it just feels like, yeah, it's
Well, and
probably
I think
needs a lot
your
more
point
discussion.
about like making sure that they're not like double dipping, it's like, okay, you're getting this, bonus from here, and now you're also getting, transfer development right bonuses that you're like not getting to a point that you aren't comfortable with or that you can't.
And I wanna be clear that
serve.
I don't think a particular developer is trying to double dip. The
Right.
issue was you had two separate developers that both felt that they had the right to get that.
Mhm.
And they both felt very strongly that they got those units. And now we're in a situation of trying to go through decade-old, development agreements and say, or 2-decade-old development agreements and say, this is what we meant, this is not what the council meant at that. Yes, I think this is a good thing to do, but like, we need to have a much bigger conversation about that.
Yeah.
And I think just going back to this fiscal impact calculator, just curious, is a calculator about that too, right? Like, I mean, we have a total entitled units we wanna maybe plan for in the city and a total number of residents and a kind of at least have a high end, and we should understand how these TDRs might impact those numbers, right? If we allowed development in another place, would that push us to 150,000 people or, another 1,000 units that we didn't plan for throughout all the rest of the general
So
plan? Does that make sense?
you just said something that I don't think I've ever really thought about before, and I think
Yeah.
that's
A goal for
a goal for the overall total units for
population
the
and
city.
units, yeah. Yeah, it just occurred to me.
And
This is more of a directing, like, this might be a side conversation that we need to ask, and this body needs to have, but what is our criteria for determining what we expect our overall population, our overall unit count to be? And I think it would be healthy in these conversations moving forward, that saying, based on this acre of land, like our overall density, what our overall plan for the community is, our overall density is, based on per unit, number of acres that we have, we expect our population to be this, and we expect a total number of this units. We have already have this many units entitled, so as we look at all these other properties, this is what we're looking at in the range of things. The more that we do here, the less we're gonna do here. And I think it might, I would really like to see those numbers, because then we can say, we're not just planning for, because one of the things we always get is you're planning for this project, then you're planning for this project, and then you're doing, and then, it's always more and always more and always more. If we start having that conversation, the greater context of, great, but it's per, you want more, great, bring in more land into the community. If you bring in more land in the community, we can start talking about more units,
And I
right?
also think that there's an aspect about this that's really important, is that oftentimes when we talk about we use terms like we need more of something or less of something, without actually quantifying how short or how over we are of something, right?
Because we could always just add more, right?
Right.
Like, we could
So-
add more here.
Right, so if we say we want more commercial, what's that specific commercial tax base we need to achieve, and what does that look like in terms of how many businesses, at what kind of that kind of a thing? So that we, I mean, the study we had from, was it
Or the Better Cities
the Better
report.
Cities report, sorry, from a couple years ago, has some of that information in it, but I think that's something to update and keep
So
kind of
maybe,
having a part of
maybe
what
that
we're doing.
becomes an action item
Right.
of that we will plan the overall the build out of the community, the expectation to build out, like we will set an expectation to build out of the city and update that every 2 years. And I know in some ways that's what the general plan is, but if we start talking in that context with developers, hey, we're only looking at another another 10,000 units in the city. Okay, well, you have X percentage of the land of what we're looking at right now. That's our starting number. Like, we're not gonna go above that in regards to density. What?
I think it's quite a bit.
I know that, but I wasn't gonna throw,
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna throw out
It's
a number that
terrifying.
somebody tried to hold me to later, right?
It's a lot.
It was just an example, Mayor, just an example.
But you get what I'm saying, right? Like, if we can come back and
Makes me
say,
sweat, right?
if we can come back and say, this is our plan, right? This is what we want to see it build out. And then every conversation we have moving forward is around that context. And if they want more, then this is our starting point. Like, this is the most we are going to consider. And if you want more, like, you have to come back and show me how to bring in more land, or how you're pulling from another area, or like, that to me is gives us a lot of strength in these conversations, instead of just, well, we think we can get this many. We're zoned this, great. Let's have a much different conversation.
And I think it ties in a lot with Blake's more specific infrastructure and utility plans and the work development plans that we're doing to figure out what those actual numbers are. And it's, I know Michael said, it's like, okay, they're a lot bigger than they have been in the past, but they're a lot more specific. So the accuracy is definitely dialed in more. But I think that's great information for the city to have to say. It's like, okay, yeah, we approved a little bit more here. So, now we just need to balance it out somewhere else and kind of figure where that is. And I think that was something that, as we worked with the planning commission, it's sort of showing them the trend of development and what was entitled and what was being built. And like, yeah, you've been seeing a lot of the multifamily being built, but there's still like all of the single family that's entitled that just hasn't been built yet because we've been, in this wave
And
of multifamily.
I would say that having these kind of tools and this idea 20 years ago would have been really helpful, right?
Even 5 years ago.
But now we're at a point where, okay, we kind of already know what those numbers are gonna be.
So let's use them.
But but that'll give us an idea. At build out, the city will be approximately X% single family detached, X% apartments, X% condos, right? So that we know what the plan is going forward, what the city's gonna look like in terms of those numbers.
And how much
meaningful amount.
commercially you can support,
Yeah,
housing
right.
employment.
And it sets a much different conversation than, hey, cause we've done
In
it,
a vacuum, yeah.
I was part of the council when we said, alright, any space that's not entitled, let's convert to commercial. It made a lot of people really mad. But any substantial open space we have, zoned it commercial overnight, like we just went out and did it. Was that right, was it wrong? We didn't really know, we were trying to deal with a couple other issues at the time. But I know other members of the body said we shouldn't have done that. Probably not, but we didn't really have the info to go off of.
Yeah.
And so being a little bit more specific on what we want, what we're looking at, I think would be super, super helpful.
And again, it would have been more helpful
20 years ago?
before, right? But I still don't think it's not helpful at this point, right? I think there's
Yeah.
value to it, right?
Well, especially as we look, there's always the possibility of incorporating more land in the city with annexations, moving west, and so.
Diluting things, right, yeah.
But being clear as to what our ultimate goal is, and if they want to, if a community wants to bring in, like, if a developer wants to bring in an area for, industrial, whatever, and wants to use that as part of the discussion of having the other houses that we build out over here. And we're gonna bring in this, but we're also gonna build this here. You know, I'm a lot more willing as an elected official to say, okay, there's some benefit to that, let's talk about that. We're not increasing what we're looking at a build out, but we might be finding a better mix.
And it really creates a perfect framework in which the TDRs would happen.
Yeah,
Like now
exactly.
you know why and how these might work and would be good and, right.
So the next few, we've got the conservation design ordinance or a zoning category or an overlay. Yeah, I think that's something that's been proposed in the past.
What, we skipped joint meeting? No, I'm just kidding. That's fine.
Yeah, the joint meeting thing is actually, I don't know if you thought about it, but Logan City has done that and it's just been super helpful for them to, it's like, hey, let's.
actually like that.
Yeah, it just brings everybody together and like everybody's got their little table and somebody can come and kind of go around the room and just find out, it's like, hey, what's up with, UDOT, what's up with Karoon Valley Water? It's just kind of a great way for people to be informed and it's also, having those regular events gives you, it's like, oh, we know we need to have this information done
Like,
by
we
this
need
meeting.
to put new gates on the dam, or on the reservoir,
Yeah.
and why this is important.
Yeah, 60 mil.
So, okay.
Michael, on this part here, and so you can answer this conservation design ordinance, right, the zone. Where would you, I'm not sure I'm totally clear where this would apply.
So it could, apply to almost any, new subdivision, and so you've got the vested development rights, but if you've got the overlay, then it's like, okay, you've got your, 10 acres and, 6 units per acre, so you've got 60 units. And, maybe they go in and do those all conventional, or if there's an open space feature that, is a benefit to having available to the residents or the community, then like you go in and you cluster those units, so it could really.
So is this similar to what we had in the FR, or the recreation zones where we had
Yeah, to allow.
considered clustering of
Right.
units, right, the
Yeah.
same kind of principle?
Yeah, and you would,
Well, but FR specifically prevented that.
true.
Like FR zone, one of the reasons, like when that all went down, like the whole reason that was updated.
I'm just saying that this is the same kind of
But-
topic that was considering,
Yeah.
right, and why that's,
Yeah.
and this is saying, this is almost the opposite approach, we're saying, if there's a unique land feature or special space that we want to preserve, we would preserve that by allowing higher density on some of the other parts of the land,
Yeah, and
something like that, right?
it's when, when you've got a specific feature, so it's not just like, hey, let's just cram these all together and
So-
then have like a.
So
usable
what
open
happened,
space.
so just maybe for some context, the reason, when that changed, and that was even before my time, when that changed, there was a lot of issues going on with some individuals outside, or some developers outside the city that were looking to take areas that were 5-acre zones or 2.5 acre zones and then buy all the land and cluster several hundred units up in the mountain on a very small piece of land, so they could say, so they could make it worth their while, but completely destroy the intent of what we had put up, what the city was intending to do up there, and annex into the city at the same time with that, that's what they were trying to do. And so the city council at the time made it very clear that the FR zone meant no clustering to prevent that specific issue from happening. Because what they were seeing was a developer come in and argue that, well, you have 5 acres, well, you can redo, and they made infographic videos and the whole thing, the city was really upset about it, I know staff felt very, like it was very underhanded. You can now have, you sell it off in parts and look at how much more money you're gonna make. Was kind of this whole conversation that was going around it, and there were not city meetings, there were community meetings that they set up saying why this would be good, and it was, I think it was some bad actors acting in bad faith. That's why they changed that, in my opinion, at the time. And so I'm fine looking at it again, but it was very much put in that way on the FR zone to prevent some of that.
Well, this is a new zone, this is a different
so-
zone for a different reason, but I just was asking.
It's in that same area, which is why
if
there's
that's
concern,
essentially
yeah.
what it would be allowed.
It's another tool that may allow us to have open space preservation without necessarily
Now, if we called it
us having to buy it, right?
And I would be fine, in all honesty, I think that there's some value to it. I think it'd be a little. It's hard when you see this and you're going through this big packet to say, wait, what? And
Right,
understand what they're
right.
saying, maybe clearing it up to say, in the event of a specific feature, or like just being really clear. That's what we would be looking at in this case. Because yeah, maybe there's a natural amphitheater that we wanna use for whatever reason, or there's a specific area that we want to great. But that should be at our discretion, not at the discretion of a developer, right?
Yeah, and I think having it as a floating overlay, it sort of gives you that discretion of like, oh, we wanna put it over this area. and
Specific
we can-
issue, yeah.
Yeah, so,
Or we could just use AID funding for it all.
there you go.
Mindy, more
More
AID funding, more AID funding,
Just to buy.
just more,
Yeah,
just more,
buy more,
more,
so.
just buy it all.
Kind of this,
Open space.
yeah.
Okay. So the ADUs, I know since we signed this to
Yeah.
the internal ADUs, and I think we updated this a little bit to kind of reflect that there's detached and attached as well as internal. But just kind of considering where those might work,
Officers are
and I think Steve, your point about the homes are designed, with that ADU in mind, and it's not necessarily.
And I think we've expressed interest in doing that, so maybe even just clarifying that, like looking at new options to allow new development to include ADUs as part of that new development, just a little bit more clear as part of new development, so that it's clear that we're open to it. Let's get something in place so that it's a true option.
And just sort of that intentionality with it.
Because I think the issue has always been for me with ADUs is shutting them in after the fact.
Yeah.
I really like the approach of doing it as part of it, because you can plan to say, hey, we need additional driveway space, right? And I'm even open to saying, let's have two driveways on the same property, and one that goes to the back and one that's, on the other side for the front, and make that but that's for another group to discuss. It's just some thoughts.
I wonder if we should have as an action item, like a monitor, or inventory.
Yeah.
Monitor the inventory of accessory dwelling units in the community.
We've got the urban rural reserve boundary, which, some of these are kind of different ways to get to the same goal, which doesn't mean that,
Curious if that's something the council wanted to do, it's a longer discussion.
yeah.
You don't have, you put it in there as an action item, but you may choose not to do it.
Exactly.
Urban reserve.
Well, we may choose to do it later down the road as we are accomplishing other action items at the time, right? That's, and it may take us 5 years to get through all those action items before we have to update the general plan.
Yeah, and some of
It just
these are-
creates an interesting thing when you put a line on a piece of paper and say, we're gonna allow development on this side and not on that side.
Oh, yeah.
Because property owners on the other side say, hey, wait a second. They may not have had any intention of doing something, they may start rushing through things, so you just wanna, those are some of those have they just have unintended consequences, you wanna.
Yeah, and I think some of these action items, as we've discussed a couple times, are, the action should be a discussion and consideration around this rather than the actual establishment of it, right?
Yeah.
I do
I
like
see the
the
word
expanded
resolution on the
program
website.
for youth.
Yeah,
That in youth council interviews, this topic comes up several times through the interviews when you ask about things that they think what would be improvements in the city. Oftentimes it's, we wish that we had more places for youth to gather and congregate, to where they can have just a wholesome environment that they can be together in. So I like that that's included in there.
I think we should just cut the entire trail system.
Trails,
I'm just kidding.
overrated.
What do you- this overlay for Harriman Old Town,
We already have one.
I know we do, that's why I'm not sure what's different about what this is.
It's not technically a zoning overlay.
Yeah.
It's just in the map.
It's a
adopted.
designated area.
Yeah, and we still, I think, Blake, you and I have been talking about how perhaps we need to work with the council to establish a policy relative to what we're gonna do with our right-of-way inventory.
What it's really called
And-
is the curb gutter exception area.
That's
That's like the whole point of that references.
Yeah.
Well, they made the map specifically so they could do the curb and gutter because they were
Right.
like, there's no reason, like, it's so patchwork, we're never gonna get curb and gutter the way we get it out there without.
So we have a street cross section for that area. And then
It's different.
Right.
And then the code references a map that is not in code, so probably.
Yeah.
So kind of like
Wait, we didn't,
tightening.
they didn't put the map in.
Now I understand.
They
Yeah.
made the map, they didn't put it in
It
code.
references it, but it's not in the code.
I could have
It
sworn.
resides on my C drive.
Oh my god. Yeah, we probably should fix that, huh?
There's a list of things that might.
Like when we
not-
found out that we were still using the old flag in ordinance.
Oh,
We used the old flag for like 6 years and we hadn't updated the ordinance and it still showed the old flag.
The connection to the trail system, I think, is a priority action
Yes.
item. I think that definitely needs to be
You could even
highlighted.
say priority action item.
We need to be pretty aggressive in that, I think, as far as making sure, cause it does us no good to have trailheads if you can't get to them.
Yeah.
And or if it's pretty difficult, there's some that are a little bit difficult to access for driving through. Neighborhood's pretty wet good and stuff.
I would specifically like them all to have sprinkler systems and use culinary water to water. I'm totally joking, I'm just poking at Sharon.
That's right.
Just wash off the parking lot periodically.
Yeah.
Sprinkle it.
Once a week.
Great use of water.
Have you seen the ones they use, they spray the hot water on it to melt the snow?
Just bring them with
I'm just.
So some of these action items, we're looking for ways to give some attention to those existing neighborhoods, because a lot of the general plan is geared towards newer development or redevelopment. And so, some of this is tailored toward what are some ideas for continuing to improve the placemaking of those stable neighborhoods. I think we had some people come to our open houses that were asking about, street trees in the medians or different landscaping for the park strip and things like that. And so that's what that was geared toward, is making sure there's sort of that continual sense of improvement or attention given to the neighborhoods, even as they start to change.
So this is more landscaping and amenity enhancement rather than
Right.
just,
Yeah,
cause that other stuff's in the active transportation plan and
yeah.
the safe transportation initiative thing, okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of like looking at that and then also just kind of boosting the.
Yeah, got it.
So one thing that I'm constantly battling is a planner. So we get commercial sites, this addresses the pedestrian realm in neighborhoods and residential areas. But when a commercial site comes through, and then you look at a sidewalk connection plan, I mean, it's the most convoluted thing you can muster in terms of
Great,
how to
let's-
get from
let's
point
add
A
a section.
to point B.
Yeah. I would like, I like your recommendation for that, I think that section specifically to talk about commercial pedestrian plans.
It would be great to do it at the point of the general plan and say, our general plan wants you to.
Would you help wordsmith how that would sound for us? And what we would be looking for in that? That would be, I would appreciate that.
Cluster conversation.
And Michael, I don't know if on the gateways, maybe we should add some conservation language in there too, because we have some gateways that are just simply a big mass of grass that serves no purpose. Maybe we need to incorporate, if we're gonna do an action, we should be looking at redesigning some of our gateways so that they incorporate our newly adopted water conservation standards. I think we should add that into there.
Yeah. Do we have, I'm thinking, do we have any like parks that have, I don't think we do, that just have a lot of trees and a walking path through it?
There's some through the Rosecrest area, through that trail system.
I'm just thinking like, that might be a great
Yeah,
place to have like a small park that's just lots of tree. I mean, I know there's some other issues that might come with that, but as opposed to just leaving it as natural vegetation, which I.e. is weeds, maybe doing just throwing out a bunch of trees and letting them go. It'll take 20 years, 30 years to make it to what we want it to be, but kind of 20, 30 years from now, it might be a really nice spot, opening of our city. Just a thought, that's maybe outside the scope of what we're talking about.
Open space area, they just took me through and we were talking about here, it's wide, and what we do is we mow it
And don't do anything with it?
pretty much.
What if it was
Well, we
trees
just don't
and,
wanna
We don't, yeah, we don't wanna pay to
have irrigation installed and
irrigation
everything
and all
else.
that, but that, the idea that you would, you can do some things like that, less the turf, so you're not wasting water on turf, but you're planting trees and creating
Drip.
a different kind of.
scrub oak, more scrub oak.
We've even had some residents ask if they could plant trees
Yeah, like a tree,
along
like,
the trail system
a
in their
memorial.
backyard.
Arbor Day donation activity and have.
I mean, why can't we have a city tree walk, right, where it's just this space where you can choose, I mean, this would be actually a perfect thing for the new 501c to participate in, is saying, hey, let's allow people to spend $100 or $150 to, to pay, donate it to the city, and they get a tree, they get a little, a little something right there in the ground with it. They get to say in memory of grandma who used to, who loved the city. I think there's a great way, and then 30, 40 years from now, they can say, hey, guess what, that's grandma's tree, right? And I think it could,
You get the Arbor Day Foundation, all that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
I mean, there's all sorts of things we could do, and yeah, it would take 20 or 30 years to really make something special out of it, but I think in 20 or 30 years, it would be like something that we could really love as a city, as a really beautiful thing
Something
for a
about
city.
that idea too, because people have asked us for like memorial park benches and things like that, right?
Why couldn't we do that in a park like that?
Why don't
Yeah.
we just put it in the trees here, right?
Yeah.
Like you can have a memorial.
Well, and if there's a walk through it,
That's kind of.
I want a tree, and then for $1,000 you put in a bench, right? And now you have a tree and a bench, right? And now it's a place to go and sit, and it's like, I just think we could, at city, as a way of entering the city, that might be a really good place where we have one of these things that we might, let's look at it. I'm on my way out, I know, but now I have big dreams.
No, are you moving? Because if you're not on your way out, you're still living here.
Yeah.
No, I'm not moving, I'm planning to be here a long time,
So
so.
there you go, you're not on your
For
way
me,
out.
I don't know, like, I would really like to be able to go somewhere like that and be like, even if it's down one of our one of the ravines or one of the ways where it's just every 50 to 100 feet, there's another tree and another park, like, that could turn out to be something people would really, really like. I don't know, that's my thoughts. Sorry, that totally went off on a side thing, I apologize.
Trees are awesome, the perfect place. Mike, you're like music to Michael's ears. So like if we can just have the word tree, like every 10 words,
Can we put an action item for trees?
yeah, trees.
Just an
You just
action
made
item,
Michael's whole night,
trees.
I know.
so you know.
Yeah, I saw-
I know, he's
I
they're
saw-
like,
Just not elms, right?
There's that one paragraph in there, and I'm like, oh, that's Michael.
yeah.
Just not elms,
I'm
right?
like, it's like a little, I'm like, people words put that
Just
later,
not
but I'm
elms.
like, yeah.
We need to build a plant park. The best thing we can do is plant
Die
trees.
after
Yeah.
like,
Except
lots
for
of-
they grow well without water, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
There you go.
And then you get Dutch elm disease. And they all die, and you have these big streets
Then
everywhere
you-
named Elm Street that don't
You
have
get to
elms.
plant more trees.
It's true.
Same discussion.
That's why we have a
So-
2-year warranty on the trees.
That's what we like.
I don't know, I think that could really
Just
turn
the
us on.
first summer when they're weed whacking around and they girdle the tree and then it dies.
Exactly. So we
Trying to-
get 2 years.
To finish
Wait, that's ours, we'll
seven, or is
go,
that-
we can go a few minutes over.
Okay, so I feel like we've gone through the chapters pretty well, had some good discussion and we've got some good direction moving forward. I think maybe we could use the rest of our time just to thinking about the future land use categories. We feel like we've covered all of the options with the future land use categories. And I know we've talked about these before, and I feel like we've got these fairly well.
And we spent a lot of time on these, yeah.
So I think these are good to go, but just kind of wanted to confirm that. And then, do you wanna, bring up?
Yeah, we
talk about
we wanted to talk about several areas that the council may direct staff to change prior to having a public hearing on the draft plan. These are areas that some of our development partners have been talking with us about, what they envision for the property as different than what the planning commission had shown on their future land use map. So you have a web version of this, Susie?
So I have the web version. The thing with the web version is because I made the updates and then
Right.
reloaded the web version to colors. I haven't calibrated the colors, but
It's alright.
if you're okay with that, then
Yes,
we'll
please.
just bring it up.
I don't know, non-calibrated colors.
We have
Man, I don't even know why we're wasting our time, I mean.
fast thing.
I think we said the
Oh, okay,
colors.
all right.
I think we should be good.
Jackie,
Rear.
you'll have to change this to rear computer.
That's what I changed it to, it's on rear.
Oh, it is on rear.
I must have spent John's cap.
Thanks, John.
All the controls.
It's over there. Command Central.
All our
Like
zone
stealthy.
word names are terrible to me.
Ragged cat.
We have two ours. Can't do that. Maybe that will hurt some. If you can go if you want. You don't have to stick around. R.5.
Oh, that's what you do. Oh.
It hasn't been necessary yet, so I'm sure it was.
It was once. We had to call, remember we had to call that? That, have them come out.
We have them.
You don't remember?
I like this picture. This is, doesn't make
Cause he called me.
Who named these?
Did you hear about that? This is a fraud.
A prosecutor, I guess.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, just. We're plugged in. And then it's like.
To be fair,
I waited
Yeah.
for like 3 hours.
I hear it's good reading material.
Good intended.
That's a text.
All of the above, right?
Look, if I had to
Because-
set up a date,
I just wanted to.
I am a city council person, zoning changes, and I'm looking to reference charts to figure out how that.
I'm gonna want one of those events
Come on.
that says
I've been doing this for 2 years, I still don't know what that means.
it's a quick way to.
Don't laugh.
See if I can.
you just.
You're just.
I'll bring those.
You're gonna be sitting here going, wait, what does that mean? What is it?
For being narrated.
For this plan.
It's November
16? Is that the canvassers meeting?
Whatever you think is best. I know.
Seriously. We were lighting up the flashback.
I know. Shut up. Like, we're gonna hear enough from that guy later. No, I was excited to hear it.
So you've got your.
Closed door lead, right, you know,
Closely, but
I didn't, I still didn't speak.
yeah, but you said it.
We'll get you a dog.
No, it's not.
I mean,
You got it. All the way through, yeah. That was, I had to like bite my tongue, I'm like, Jesus, I really wanna say something, but. Yeah.
It seems like I did.
It's been a long time.
You know what did happen is Jackie started sending me council packets. That's what happened. When was it? Yeah, yeah. You did, that's true. I guess that didn't start before.
It wouldn't be what it is.
No, nothing, absolutely nothing changed, right? I was suddenly everybody's best friend, but other than that,
yeah, lots of like.
lots of new fans. You what?
For Tuesday, for next Wednesday.
Actually, you got some drafts for me?
That is so your relationship.
So dumb. So dumb.
Oh, my God.
resolution agreement, or the.
Stephen, or Matt,
That's going to December,
With a lot of companies, just do it a year.
For hiccups.
360 But he hasn't been with SLR, he's been with property.
We'll have to sit down and look at the details.
oh, so this
He said he's
is,
been managing
That's from
property.
December though, right?
Talking to Dave Ranky today, so I met with him. They're a little concerned.
Oh, really?
So they've lost that connection.
Oh, yeah, I bet they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a little concerned. This guy's really young, but he's managing properties in Europe and here before this, now he switched to here.
Yeah,
I think this is a promotion.
It's not recorded yet, I know, I'm just gonna wait on that one, so,
Okay.
you know,
For signature.
yeah.
They still have it though.
I would say that.
Transportation Commission meeting. He's not gonna be with us at all.
Oh, me too.
Because
We should show them, let me know what they really want, how big
Absolutely.
could be much more.
I already know that because the premise of the whole leadership is that, is it's
Right.
Well, they were telling us they're gonna do some housing types that rent a home or things to get people starter homes, kind of that concept. They're going to develop them themselves. And not have.
that doesn't sound, because I think that they're objective.
So the first area that we wanted to talk about is this, right here.
So real quick before we get started on this, I do wanna just thank staff, I know we're gonna run a little bit long today. And I know we said it was gonna be a 2-hour meeting, so thank you for being a little bit patient with us as we get through this last little bit, so we can get this moving forward, so thank you guys. Go ahead.
So right now, this is the neighborhood commercial node, so this is the lower intensity of the retail commercial.
That's where we thought Costco was gonna go, right?
No,
No.
that's
This
next
is
to the auto
west
mall.
of the auto mall.
Yeah, so this is
Yeah, the
the,
garden lot.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, see, that's why I was asking, cause I was like, I don't know where we're at.
The
The garden
ask
plot,
is
That's the garden plots.
to change the front to some type of a more traditional commercial strip, right? And then the rear would be probably the residential two, more of a medium density residential. And we're not exactly sure what depth this should be just yet. But does the council have an appetite
How deep
to-
is the commercial on the other side?
That's the auto
It was
mall.
all the way back down,
Yeah.
now, so it's like 600 feet.
So it's way deeper, that's.
it's way
okay.
deeper, but if you kind of look, like here's the commercial
On the other side.
on the other side is. And so we could just do a depth that is similar to.
But that would be more commercial.
And that's more oriented to the street, and I think, you know, what Michael was suggesting is, are we looking at more of a shopping center or a little.
You know, it'd be
village
really
center?
handy for this if we had like a land use impact calculator thing, that would be.
Yeah, I'm still
is
quite
nice property.
hesitant to change that, but.
And we can talk, we can discuss the depth,
So
but
right.
do we want to change this to basically front would be traditional retail, commercial, and the rear would be residential?
I really struggle with that.
I ditto on that, I really struggle with that.
So my appetite for the next 2 months is no.
And Blake, do you have anything else from our, this is,
Can I say something about that though?
Yeah, talk to me.
Is my natural tendency is to say no, but I don't have
Enough information?
a data-driven basis for that.
Well, and that's-
It could still be a reasonable accommodation and a good choice to do
That's
it.
why my inclination
But I
is to
don't know.
say no, is because
Okay.
I don't feel comfortable just turning that over at this point because I
Until we've
don't
done
understand
analysis,
why
yeah.
we should.
we could provide a little bit of analysis, some of the data
And
that
that,
we're looking for.
well, and
And that's part of the process, is like, you
I mean,
generate the
conversations-
data, like you can
the
have.
conversations like, hey,
Thanks.
We're looking to bring in a specific commercial entity. Well, I'd be more willing to, but I've heard this council say many times that a general plan is general, and we can make changes after the fact.
True, however, what we've done in the past is that we have made everything be negotiable. Now we're trying to do with this general plan, we're trying to signal what we want ahead of the game. Like, where do we want our development community to move towards, rather
It's
than
not all
make them
TBD.
always come to the community or to the table to negotiate,
What?
right?
I'm just leaving, I want them to continue to have to do that.
My concern once again is that long-term planning. Because what's fast and easy to sell right now is exactly what's being
Right.
proposed to put on the
Right.
back half of that. And I don't wanna give away something that would be a key element in our city because something's fast and easy to develop right now, just, you know what I mean? And it was designed that way for a purpose, and so if we're gonna change that, I need to understand the why we would be changing that.
You know,
On their end, I'm sure they're thinking, commercial's tough, and the deeper the site, into the site you go, the harder it is to lease, to do deals. You know, the further away you get from your frontage, that's their position,
Where's the closest Sam's Club?
right?
Is there a way to preserve
South George or
multiple frontage of commercial rather than just total depth?
Type of Sam's Club. What do you mean by that?
Being preserve almost an L shape of it,
Yeah.
right?
So along
So something like that,
Oh, you're
yeah.
talking along
So
here,
that
right?
all of the part that's up against those roads would remain commercial and maybe you could tuck, maybe you put an access road in there or something, but.
So you
Yeah,
actually
put
have
the-
two,
Put the
Right, kind of
residential
like
behind it.
there's a spot, right, this parcel's cut in half, so if you were doing that, it would create kind of some weird things. But again, general plans,
I would,
they're general, but they usually do still follow parcel lines.
I would say with just the question that you've proposed to us right now, do we wanna look at doing something different?
Not without
Not right
more
now,
information.
but yeah.
So in regards to this specific document, as we're looking moving forward, the answer to me is no.
Let's slide to the crescent shaped one to the further west.
Closing on the back.
I think we will still,
Yeah.
but what, I think there's a difference between
We'll consider.
what we'll
versus
consider
what
in
we
that
can.
conversation based on information,
Right,
rather than saying, we're gonna go ahead and preemptively change the zoning
yes.
without
It
it.
could be a
Make
yes
sure
in the
that
future,
you're
you just
in
wanna
that
Right.
make sure that if you say yes, there's.
Yeah, it was on those 7 or 8,
Yeah.
I know.
These are both.
Yeah.
This piece right here, should be commercial, this is a separate owner, and this is just a technical correction. The rest of the site is the contaminated site.
Oh, that part.
Now,
Oh,
there
that's where
has
they
been
want to
a
put
concept
the
of saying, we
I
could
kinda
possibly
like that
clean
idea.
this site up by moving the contaminated soil over into the Automall site and
blending
then change this back to residential. When we went from residential to commercial, this community was not very happy with us.
Yes, they
So-
were very outspoken.
It seems like we have an opportunity of making this go back to residential. Commission heard that and still said, no, we'd like to see if we could get commercial here.
I
So-
genuinely don't think that we're gonna see like, either way, that land is so encumbered with that contaminated soil that it's gonna be a problem to do anything.
If the soil stays, the contaminated soil stays, the commercial designation is the right call. But if there is an opportunity to clean this up,
Right.
if, and the incentive is residential, are we interested in doing that?
So I don't know if
in the
anyone else on the council has seen what Larry's, conceptual idea for that is.
A development down in, I think Lehigh.
Yeah,
Right,
it's clever.
yeah.
It
I
is.
think there's some interesting parts of it, and I'm not opposed to it just because I like the concept. But again, do we need to preserve 15 more acres of commercial right there or not? Is that the
Okay,
right decision for the city,
And
or is it just a guess?
is he for sure gonna do that then, take
Yeah, that's the big
contamination over in there, or?
well, you could change it, you've changed it once, we could change it again if it fails to come through, but.
I think a lot of that is gonna end up as part of an MDA, right?
And that's really,
the
to me,
appropriate-
that's really what comes down to is I think right now, being that it is encumbered with that, and the only thing that really makes sense there until that is no longer there is commercial.
Yeah.
I think commercial zoning is right for now, especially being that that would come through an MDA, then we can do something different really easily because it's part of an MDA. But until then, I think commercial, because if somebody's looking at it saying, it really is, it's commercial until we can do something with that cap, right? Or with that contamination in the cap.
But I would say
Totally open to it.
we're completely open to changing it soon. I mean, maybe even before this is finally adopted.
Yeah.
Assuming that we have all the data and plan in place and an agreement, so.
Wanna,
I just wanna add something with the contamination, so as we've worked on trying to get this site cleaned up, it's been upwards of keeps going up $10 million to haul this off.
Yeah, we
So
basically
there's
said we give them the
basically
land.
one opportunity to get this cleaned up would be to have a large piece of land where you could mix it. We actually have this right now. As that develops and disappears, the opportunity to clean this up at no cost to the city.
But I think you said the key thing as it develops, and I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah.
So if I can see that, that's moving forward.
If there was an agreement that had that
Yeah,
all
but
tied
it's
together,
not happening,
that's,
yeah.
that's all I just wanted to say is if it doesn't happen with the auto mall in conjunction, there's probably not an opportunity to clean this up without some magic money.
But I think all of
Basically
those,
giving land away.
I think we have indications that there's possibility to incorporate all this in a formal agreement.
I think we've given the direction that's needed in this particular item.
We should be realistic, it's not a great commercial site.
It's not, no.
It's not.
It's not a great
You
commercial site.
could
It's a
do a
weird
gas
site,
station
yeah.
there maybe,
It's just a
then
strange shape.
the residents.
The corner is commercial and will remain that.
Yeah.
At
Yeah, I
56
agree.
West.
And
Yeah,
I
that
don't
corner makes
think it's
sense.
a
The
great
rest of it
commercial
is-
spot either, but we give up
Storage
big
units.
commercial spot that somebody said could never be commercial, and I saw flex space going all up along the road on Mountain View corridor, so there's opportunities everywhere.
See, I would just, if it was on Mountain View corridor, I'd say that's.
Yeah, it's
I
like
understand,
not,
but
This is
I'll
just
be
this weird
commercial.
All I'm
deal.
saying is, it's just that we
C1 is.
sometimes make
Alright, so we
knee-jerk
don't need to talk
decisions
about
based
that.
on, it's like, no, it would never happen, but it's like, could it happen in 20 years
You
from
could
now?
put storage units on there pretty easily.
Anyway, I'm just saying that
Sorry, I'm
there's.
gonna bring us all back together here.
That's a clean out. That's a clean out.
I don't mean to argue with you, it's just-
I'm just saying, in my 21 years
Yeah,
experience
we
trying to
just
sell, I
haven't
don't
looked
think
at
I could ever
several.
sell that for commercial.
yeah, but you could probably put storage units up in the blink of an eye.
What's our next one?
We have just a few more sites.
That would make all the residents behind there really happy.
You could put a storage unit everywhere.
Anywhere, yeah.
Hey, there-
Everybody wants a place to
complaining
store
they can't
it.
store their RVs and boats.
Yeah, you could store RVs, but
Yeah, right here.
you can always use something.
So Kim Renlisbacher, one of our development partners, Scenic Development. This is Redemption.
We talked about this before.
This is zoned currently C2. So presently, we are anticipating some type of either office or commercial retail. Our C2 zone does not allow manufacturing or wholesaling. But of course, those concrete tilt-ups that you're seeing, a lot of those are assembly, wholesaling, distribution. And of course, that's the kind of commercial projects that you're seeing right now. So the question is do we wanna see this in the general plan change from just traditional retail to more flex space?
Zoom out just a smidge.
So it would probably become either the employment center or
Yeah.
the, potentially the office mixed use.
I would be totally cool with the office there.
Can I just say something? This is exactly why those tools are necessary,
Yeah.
for exactly this decision. Because
Yeah.
at this point it's, well, what do you think? Well, what do you
Yeah.
think? And we're all just giving an opinion about something without any real definitive basis as to what would be a better
Yeah.
decision, what's more developable,
Yeah.
what brings more revenue to the city, what could be done, you know,
So,
that kind of.
so when I look at the map in the general plan, to me, there's a high correlation between commercial and retail. And so when I would be looking, if I was to be looking at this as for a decision in regards to, are we gonna allow that land use or whatever for that particular zone? And we need to make a change, I would be highly likely to be comfortable making a small switch one way or another, even if this stayed the way it was on the general plan now. Because to me, retail versus commercial, I think there's a lot of overlap there, especially with the way that retail is going, where it's more online, less in store.
Okay, well, again, it sounds like let's bring some
Details.
economic maybe measures that you could look at that in a future meeting.
So is the general plan down to that detail where you're saying this is a commercial site, but this is office versus this is commercial site
And
versus
the main
retail?
reason for that, Nathan, is that, again, and it's kind of unusual, our C2 zone does not allow wholesale activities. We're zoning for dollars, right?
So
it's
we're
retail.
after retail.
Right, and that's not the kind of
So,
use that they will
That,
get.
what that's telling me is that maybe sometime in the near future, we need to have
much more in-depth discussion about that, with this body.
Okay,
So,
But that was a specific
Request.
The general plan process was to be a little bit more specific about where retail was wanted versus commercial, which is
Or jobs.
or the honest.
Can I just go on record, I think this is important to say, and I hope that the rest of the council would support this idea too, is that I think we are very open-minded to making changes when and where they're appropriate, based on a real tangible plan.
yes.
Arbitrarily making changes to the general plan based on
I want to do this.
what might happen someday or what we think, I'm really uncomfortable with those decisions. When somebody comes and says, hey, I'd like to do this, and I think I can make this happen, would you guys be willing to do this? Even LOI or something that says, yeah, we're completely on board with making these zoning changes, assuming that you're gonna execute on your side. Similar,
Yeah.
we have agreement on like the game point, those kind of things, right? We're willing to do all kinds of things if you'll execute on your side too, right?
We've met with a
I
couple of
think we're
groups
all,
for this site.
we've kind of said that before, but
Bring us a plan.
yeah.
okay.
So we've met with a couple groups for this site, and I think that's good information to take back to them, cause that's usually their question is, what's the likelihood of us getting something changed?
If you bring us a solid plan, we are open to
Let's
it,
get a plan,
absolutely.
cause they don't really wanna spend a lot to get to that point. They, they've probably got 15 other sites in the state they're looking at, so they wanna get working and
We
going.
just
So-
commuted that exact same thing to another party, right, 2 weeks ago, right, where we let them say, hey, look, bring us a plan, we'll reconsider this.
Yep.
Right?
We'll take that back.
I think this may be the last site is what we've been often calling the Laguna Malibu property.
Kind of this
Yeah,
area, which right now, most of it is in that lower density mountain canyon residential, sort of the equivalent to those forestry zones with some of the open space specified with the intent of purchasing some of the
Right.
open space. And then the darker, this purple is that resort recreational activity center, which is intended to be a little bit more of a potential income property, but very
What's the ask?
Yeah.
request is to do the PC designation like we did for Olympia.
Because altogether it's.
That was all together
1,000
at the same
acres.
time. I would have a hard time doing that until after there was a plan in place with an MDA and all of that. So for me, and this goes back to exactly what Steve just said. Bring us a plan with actual data, with actual things before we're gonna be making a change because I want this, right? It's valid, it's a valid request. It was specifically one of the communities or the potential areas that we called out in creating that specific
And that's why we put that 250 acre.
that's exactly why
So-
that was there, but until there's a lot more something there, no, we're putting the cart before the horse.
Other than if we designated that and showed us that, then that's the way it's gonna have to be developed. If we show it as this is gonna have to come in under that type of use,
Right.
then that preempts, that says you're gonna have to come in with this under that.
Is that
But what it
Or
means
was it
is
a
that
tool?
they would end up knowing that they're gonna be applying for this large
They have to use
master
Master plan
plan.
community zone.
Yeah,
If I remember correctly though, that wasn't a zone.
It's a tool that allows the creation of a zone.
Yeah.
right, and the subzone is the meat of the MPA and all the design standards and.
Bring me more data, in all honesty, until we're that's my thoughts. I don't know. Do you guys disagree? Bring more data?
No, I don't wanna be tough about, but I wanna make a better decision.
Yeah.
Instead of just that's. Right now, it's all based on whim.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'll do that, no, I don't think I'll do that. There's no real basis for why we would do one or the other.
We've been saying, so here's what I'm looking at as we're finishing up here. We have for years have been saying we are trying to grow as a city, and we are trying to do things as an adult city and not as a fledgling child city or even a bunch of teenagers, right? We are trying to do this in a very methodical, adult, developed community kind of way. We are big enough and we should absolutely be doing that. So for me, making decisions because it's anything other than we have what we need to actually make a strong decision, it's not the time or place to do it.
Susie, did we already make this change on the employment? Okay, alright, I think so we've got the rest of them.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
You got about 6 minutes, guys.
Where are you looking at?
So the Bowler property is just across the street.
That one I had a question about whether that was, I didn't know
Okay.
if that was a done thing or if that was a.
Let's go up to that.
I can, if you
Yeah.
go, I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just like to remind everybody that we got a lot of
Is that
side
the last
conversations
one?
going on.
Was the last two, I think.
And side conversations make it hard for the council to work as a body, so we need to make sure that we're focusing on one conversation at a time, please.
Yeah, and Mayor Clinton has two additional pieces that he wanted to talk about, just really quick.
So these are in current application now. So this one will be coming to the planning commission, I think. Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tomorrow night.
What is that street?
So
This
this is
Main
Oh, it's just
City
right the
Hall
corner
here.
over here, yeah.
So this is the
Oh, that's
Holiday.
the gas station
this is where
property,
the
yeah,
this is where gas
So is
is
it the
going.
come and go or whatever you call it?
Right.
whatever it was supposed to be, yeah.
So right now, the application is, and it's consistent with our current general plan. For this front portion here to be commercial, and then back behind it, they were wanting to do a low density neighborhood, residential neighborhood.
How low density?
Same as the kind of.
So like
area.
Quarter,
an R
third,
115.
some halves, right?
Yeah.
Do we have a road alignment
Issue
thing
there?
that was there that we didn't?
So during the subdivision process, we'll work that road alignment issue out. But this is just for the rezone, that they do have a plan and a conceptual plan in place.
And it's zoned what right now?
So right now, it's zoned,
Is that C2?
I think it's zoned residential and commercial. I think it's top,
Is it zoned that now or just
I think it's
master
zoned
plan?
A1 right now.
Yeah.
Oh, it's all
Yeah,
in
it's
one.
zoned
Still
A1,
A1.
right?
The
Yeah.
general plan,
So this is gonna come to us,
Yeah,
is it zoned A1,
Yeah.
but it's
Yes.
general plan the other?
yeah,
right, but just to be consistent with
Convenience store?
this general plan,
yeah,
Convenience store.
Actually,
they
I
don't
think
have
that
any
kind of makes
proposals
sense
for
there.
the,
For the corner.
for the corner, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, putting commercial
So there's not actually, so I wanna make it clear here, there's not actually a proposal to put any commercial there. They basically wanna split it so they can just have residential now.
They talked about a strip mall or something like that.
But there's not an actual proposal, they just want to be able to put the residential in right now.
Cause right now it's agriculture.
It's all A1.
Yeah,
It's A1.
I'm okay with that, especially because they're preserving the commercial and sometimes the residential provides some improvements along there that bring the commercial a little bit faster and there would be preservation of the corners. And that's the way it's already planned, right? Currently planned that way.
Right now it'd just be residential.
the general plan has got commercial on
On
the,
the edge.
Yeah,
on the,
right
yeah,
now the commercial is shown here on
So
the,
they're just
Yeah.
there's no master plan change, they're just proposing to rezone, match the
right.
master plan.
So
There's
why-
a utility that's encumbering part of that corner.
Yeah.
Yes.
right, so the,
Good
it
size.
excludes that
Yes.
portion,
yeah,
So-
the big
Really?
station, so it
Oh, yeah, there's
excludes
a
that.
big
So
natural
it would
gas.
be-
Are we, so why are we having to ask here on the general plan? Like, why is this not just something that's coming to
so
us?
the rezone right now is consistent with our current general plan, but the proposed general plan is moving in a different direction.
What color is that one then? What's the proposed?
This is the neighborhood
The
commercial.
neighborhood commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
basically
kind
you
of the
just-
same,
Matching this orange over to where the residential neighborhood comes into, and then leaving this as,
right, the corner would stay the
Commercial.
neighborhood commercial and the kind of the back.
So just so that I
Oh.
understand here, so this portion they're looking to keep as commercial.
Commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The rest over here, so this portion is commercial
Everything behind it.
and
would be
everything
the-
behind it is gonna be residential.
It just
Yeah.
aligns with what's already done
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
So do we wanna make that orange where it's green, except for the corner, which is commercial?
That's really a decision for you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It aligns with what's directly across the street from it too. It's-
But again, I think to be consistent, I'd like to see what the proposal is.
Sounds
So
like
you'll
it's
see the
gonna go to
proposal.
planning commission,
Okay,
right?
then I think,
Yeah.
once we see it, we can give feedback as to whether or not we should change it, right?
and if it gets changed in that plan, then you can change it in this one.
Did you have one more?
There was one more, but it's the same kind of thing. It's just to extend a single family neighborhood that's, I think the density on it is 1 acre lots. They want to make that an 8.25 zone.
Where, I'd have to see it before we talk, like,
Right.
do we have?
So you'll see that in a couple of months too.
Where's it
So-
at?
Well, like,
It's
you're saying,
yes,
you're
the
saying you want us
reserves
to change on the general plan here, is that what we're talking about right now, or is you just saying that this is something that's coming to us
Well,
in the future?
it's in that same vein. We can bring plans to you so you can make a more informed decision, and then we can,
So what is it zoned right now on the future general plan of those?
on the future general plan.
Can you pull it up for us real quick? Where is it?
Yeah, what's the,
Shoot.
Because you're
Zoom out a
you're
little bit.
indicating that somebody's gonna want something immediately different than what we're planning on zoning it, so.
It's the reserves at Sky Ridge.
That,
It is. I think it's right here,
Right there.
right there. So what is this orange color here?
so that is the, kind of the low density, those like ag
Reserves
residential.
at Sky Ranch.
Oh, okay, so maybe that's
Sky.
So maybe
consistent
that's
with,
okay then?
it's consistent with this plan.
Okay.
Just not the existing.
Yeah, he's
Alright.
he's building 1/3
That's why-
and half.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's already, he's building
It's
61
a,
lots
it's a
now.
beautiful subdivision.
alright, so, have you gotten all the direction that you guys need from us
Yes.
in regards to this meeting?
Yeah.
Yes.
Been super helpful.
One,
Yes, Steve.
like, this would be a way future agenda item thing,
Way.
yeah.
It's all dug up, roads are going.
The names of our zones drive me
Crazy, they're awful.
We gotta fix it. At least, I mean, in the A zones, we're talking acreage, in the R zones, we're talking square footage. And they're exactly the same,
Right.
like, and they don't make sense. I don't,
Action
yeah,
item.
we need to make them all the same. We need to clarify that and have a consistency.
We need better purpose statements too in our zoning code.
Alright, so I believe that brings us to the end of our agenda. If there's no further discussion from members of council, accept the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we are adjourned, thank you for all of you to stay extra.
You should say that property.
Hey,
Triangle,
they're gonna get right now.
Yes.
Okay, you can place it.
So I said, so there's storage
That's what Mike
units,
said.
but you can't, you
I told him
can't
to
do,
to make sure.
it's not gonna be.
Gymnastics gym right there?
Because we, I mean,